Hogwarts, forbidden son of the Black and White Lord. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 26, Shining on the Stage. Of course, Professor Flitwick. But it may be a little faster. After all, there is potions in the afternoon. I don't want to be hated on the first day of school. Our headmaster will hate you, Augustus said half jokingly. Okay, then I'll make a long story short. I think you sort out your teaching method just now and then publish it on Daily Charms. You can win the Best Newcomer award. We have been at Hogwarts for many years. No one has ever won this award, Professor Flitwick said excitedly, and his beard jumped up and down. Of course, it's Milner, Augustus said modestly, then took out 3 books from his body and handed them to Professor Flitwick. This is? Professor Flitwick asked suspiciously. This is the spellcasting skills I compiled from the 1st to the 3rd grade, Augustus said relaxedly. Of course, it is only a deletion of the elementary curse-cracked edition given by the system. It is only guaranteed to allow people to master level 1 spells. After all, more advanced skills will still be used for future awards. But it is such a cut-down version. Professor Flitwick also saw it with relish. After all, the teaching materials in the magic world have not changed for hundreds of years. And this kind of full-style textbook with detailed interpretation is simply a blow to dimensionality reduction. Professor Flitwick held the 3 small books in his hand, and he couldn't put them down. He pulled Augustus excitedly to proofread the contents of the books, completely forgetting the time. I'm so sorry to keep you from lunch, boy, Professor Flitwick said apologetically, but then spoke excitedly. But the significance of the book is too great. We want to publish it. They will cause shocks in the entire magical world. You will become the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin. Okay, Professor, I have to get ready to go to class. After all, if I don't hurry up, I may not be able to catch up. Augustus took out his pocket watch and looked at it and said softly to Professor Flitwick. Professor Flitwick apologized repeatedly to Augustus and asked him to go to the principal's office to discuss in detail at night. As if he had been pardoned, Augustus thanked the professor and hurried to the potions classroom. The potions classroom was in the basement of Hogwarts Castle. There were many braziers hanging in the classroom, but the air was still very cold. Sensing the surrounding environment, Harry Potter couldn't help shrinking his neck and then looked around with his eyes. Except for the students, there were only some stuffed animals soaked in potions. It's disgusting. Harry muttered a little, then opened his notebook and wrote a 1 on it, marking this as his first potions lesson. It's a good thing we weren't late. I heard from Fred and the others that Professor Snape is very scary. He's like a vampire bat in human skin. Ron complained frantically to Harry and told Harry about Professor Snape with embellishments. What gloomy, indifferent, mean, harsh, what partiality for Gryffindor students, and who don't like to wash their hair or pay attention to personal hygiene. It's almost a dirty pervert. Impossible. After hearing Ron's description, Harry couldn't believe it. What I said was true. Absolutely true, Ron said loudly with a firm face. Oh, it seems you have a deep prejudice against our headmaster, Mr. Weasley. A strange ridicule came from the door. It's none of your business, Draco Malfoy. You Slytherins don't have any good people. Draco frowned and said coldly. Be careful with your words. If you dare to insult Slytherin's honor again, we are willing to help your family reduce the financial burden. After finishing speaking, Weasley ignored him with a strange face and directly led the little Slytherin snakes into the classroom. Seeing that Ron was about to say something more, Harry quickly pulled him back and said eagerly, Ron, you are too anxious to speak. Don't forget that Augustus is also in Slytherin. Don't say any more. Thinking of the powerful spell he saw on the train, Ron couldn't help shivering, but he still muttered something. In the first place, the mysterious man graduated from Slytherin, and people from the Dumbledore family. How could they be assigned to Slytherin? The sorting hat must be broken. Harry listened to it and thought it was true. In fact, many Gryffindors thought that Augustus should come to Gryffindor. After all, he was the headmaster's grandson. How could Dumbledore go to Slytherin? Harry and Ron wanted to say something, but the wooden door of the basement was pushed open with a bang, and a long-haired wizard with a gloomy expression strode into the classroom in a hurry. Professor Severus Snape went straight to the podium, then turned around, facing the students with his sinister face. This class doesn't require you to fiddle around with your wand or say spells. So, I think many of you may not know how to appreciate the profound knowledge of potions. Professor Snape walked around the classroom while talking, came to the Slytherin students, took a look, and finally set his sights on Draco Malfoy. Where has our unparalleled genius, Mr. Augustus Dumbledore, been late for the first class? I hope there is a reasonable explanation. Snape said coldly, as if the air had dropped a few degrees following his words. Hearing these terrible words, Draco felt like his heart would stop beating, but he still insisted on explaining to Snape. There was no way he couldn't afford to offend both sides. After listening to Draco's explanation, Snape nodded expressionlessly, then walked away and continued. However, for the very few who are truly gifted, I can teach you how to confuse your mind and confuse your senses. I will teach you to win fame, brew brilliance, and even teach you to resist death. As soon as the words were finished, Professor Snape pinched the hem of his robe and folded his hands on his chest, looking at everyone with a gloomy expression. In the classroom, it was dead quiet, only the crackling sound of the firewood burning in the brazier. Looking at the stunned freshman in front of him, Snape nodded secretly, ready to move further. At this moment, suddenly a bright flame ignited in the open space in front of the podium, blocking Snape's progress. Just as Snape was about to draw out his wand, someone suddenly stepped out of the flames. "Thank you, Heir," Augustus said kindly, and after finishing speaking, he slowly stroked Heir's back with his hands, and then hung a whole bag of good bird snacks around Heir's neck. Only then did Heir disappear into the air in satisfaction. Looking at the students in front of him, but not seeing Professor Snape, Augustus said with a long breath, "It's a good thing I wasn't late, otherwise the old bat's face would be so ugly." Chapter 27 The Potions Class. It seems that our Mr. Augustus Dumbledore has a big misunderstanding about his dean. A word without emotion came from behind Augustus. Even Augustus couldn't help shivering. Augustus turned his head with difficulty and saw Snape's face that was already a bit ferocious. Because of his anger, Augustus could only say with a wry smile, "Oh, Professor, you are here. I thought you didn't come. Have you already attended class? Then I won't bother you." After speaking, he walked towards Draco and kept winking along the way, telling him to make an empty seat quickly. Draco looked at Snape's face like the bottom of a pot and thought for a while, if he doesn't let it go, he will die a miserable death in the future. If he lets it go, he may die a miserable death now. Thinking of this, Draco decided not to give up his position. After all, there is still a difference between dying now and later. It seems that this class is his swan song. "Mom, you may not see Zion along in the future." Tears streamed down his face, and he buried his head in sobs. Seeing Draco suddenly buried his head in tears, the students next to him were at a loss. Draco had seen it for so long, but no one came to comfort him, and for a while, he was even more ashamed. Whether Slytherin could recover. "I'm already like this, but you didn't respond. The hell is really empty. The devil is in the world, and for a while, you even cried loudly." Seeing Draco's crying, people in the classroom talked a lot, but the most talked about was that Draco couldn't stand Snape crying because of Snape's fright and such things. "To shut up," Professor Snape yelled. "If Draco is not feeling well, go to the school hospital by himself. Don't cry in class. Get out of here," Snape said sourly to Draco with a dark face. Hearing Professor Snape's voice, Draco felt as if he was listening to fairy music, and he directly ignored the harshness in his tone. "The Godfather still loves me, and he can finally leave this place of right and wrong." Draco stood up immediately, strode towards the outside of the classroom, and looked back at Snape gratefully from time to time. There was no way he was really scared. Draco looked at Snape with trepidation. Does this godson have some serious illness? It seems that he needs to contact Lucius. "Stand, Mr. Dumbledore, I haven't given you a seat yet," Snape called to Augustus, who had slid over as soon as he saw a vacant seat. Augustus looked at Professor Snape, who was still staring at him, looked at his ferocious face, and knew that, if he didn't bleed a little today, he couldn't settle the matter. So from the system space, he took out a piece of parchment and a glass bottle that glowed pink, and handed it to the other party, flatteringly said to Professor Snape, "I came late because of this. I want to study a potion. Please forgive my late, Professor." Looking at the handsome young man in front of him who avoids the important and talks nonsense, Snape is really angry now, and he opened his mouth to spray the venom. "I want to let you meet today, the #1 sprayer at Hogwarts level." Seeing that Professor Snape was about to make a big move, Augustus said hastily, "This potion can make people meet the person they want to see the most." Snape was interrupted from casting spells. He was speechless for a long time. Then he fixed his eyes on the boy in front of him and said, "What you said is true. Of course, it's just that the medicine has side effects. After drinking it, you will lose one day's magic power, and you will lose all of it. The feeling of being exhausted of magic power is not pleasant," Augustus said slowly. Snape hadn't finished listening to what Augustus had to say, and as soon as he heard the word "of course," he snatched the parchment and the glass bottle away, and then began to observe carefully. Snape first looked at the information on the parchment, then observed the color of the potion in the glass bottle, finally opened it and smelled it, nodded, and then asked Augustus word by word, "What do you want in exchange?" "It doesn't need anything. How about I get exempted from punishment this time, Professor?" Augustus said with a smile. Snape's face twitched, and he cursed inwardly. "Why doesn't the Dumbledore family have a good person? It's because I don't want anything on the surface, but I want to squeeze you dry in secret. This is a family of scum. Come to my office on Sunday. Alright, now get back to your seat," Snape said calmly. Augustus hurried to Draco's original location. Snape settled down and soon began his classic scene. Having said that, maybe some of you who came to Hogwarts already have extraordinary abilities and are confident enough to think that you cannot pay attention to my lectures. Speaking of which, Snape slowly walked off the podium, came to the long table in Slytherin, and took a deep look at Augustus. Just when everyone thought that Snape was going to take revenge on Augustus, Snape turning around suddenly, he said to Harry, "Mr. Potter, the famous savior, tell me what would happen if I added daffodil root powder to the wormwood infusion." The atmosphere suddenly froze, and Harry, who was about to eat melons and watch a play, was even more confused. Seeing Harry's bewildered expression, Snape continued to ask, "I don't know. Well, let me ask you something else. If I need a Bezoar, do you know where to find it?" This time Harry shook his head honestly, and Hermione next to him reacted and raised her hand quickly. Snape ignored her and asked Harry without hesitation, "So, what's the difference between a Aconitum acanthus and a Aconitum chamagiasma?" "I don't know, the Professor." Harry's voice trembled a little. Although Augustus, who watched the classic scene, found it quite enjoyable, he still felt that Snape was a bit too much, and he heard Snape say something, just as he was about to say something. "Put your hands down, Miss Granger. Let's hear what another famous genius has to say. Mr. Augustus, please answer the question just now." "Damn, really stingy. This greasy man must have hated what he did just now. You wait until you beg me. When I have practiced the resurrection potion, I will let you run naked around Hogwarts." Augustus thought hard in his heart, but he still said with a smile on his face, "Narcissus root powder and wormwood can be made into a powerful hypnotic, which is the water of life and death. Coprolithes are stones taken from the stomachs of cattle and sheep, which can detoxify. Aconitum acanthus and Aconite chamagiasma are the same plant. They are collectively referred to as aconitum. One more thing, this doesn't seem to be the content of the first grade, Professor." Slytherin 10 points. Mr. Potter can't answer a single question, so you can see that you didn't read the book. Gryffindor deducted 5 points. Mr. Augustus Dumbledore questioned the professor, and Slytherin deducted 1 point. Snape said with a blank face, then walked up to the podium, turned around and shouted at the students, "Why don't you write down everything just now? Don't you know it all? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28 Brew Potion. Hearing Professor Snape's roar, the little wizards didn't dare to neglect, and immediately wrote down the answers with quill pens, and the rustling sound of writing instantly filled the entire classroom. Snape was quite satisfied with the scene in front of him, and looked at Augustus complacently. Augustus has nothing to do, after all, is he a professor? But Augustus has already begun to brew a revenge plan in his heart. Seeing that most people stopped writing, Snape said coldly, "Now open your book. On the 6th page you start to make potions in groups of 2. This is just a simple potion for treating scabies. As long as you move your brains, that are better than trolls, I think you should no problem." Hearing Snape's words, everyone started to form a team on their own. Augustus wanted to go to Hermione's place, but before he had gone a few steps, a black hand grabbed Augustus by the back collar. "I think you're in the wrong place, Mr. Augustus." As Snape said, he pulled Augustus by the collar, put him next to a Slytherin girl, and said harshly, "For a genius like Mr. Augustus, there is no need for that kind of pediatric potion. I have a small bottle of Felix elixir that is not yet finished. You can do this, and at the same time guide your classmates to complete today's lesson." Snape took out a small bottle of red potion from his bosom, and handed it to Augustus. Augustus looked at the potion, relying on his top alchemy and potion talents up to 8 points. Augustus can conclude that this greasy man is trying to embarrass me, fat tiger. This shit is a half-finished product, and this is a failure. Before Augustus could argue, Snape continued, If you can't finish this class, you will have to deal with 300 slugs when you come to my office on Sunday, without gloves." After saying that, he turned and left. Augustus looked at the back of the old bat, and made an international friendly gesture. "Now you not only have to run around Hogwarts naked, but also dance ballet while running naked. I will remember the hatred of the old man," Augustus thought fiercely. "Hello, Mr. Dumbledore, thank you for teaming up with me." A soft and lovely voice came, and Augustus immediately turned his head. A very petite and cute girl looked at him with embarrassment. This girl had delicate features and beautiful blonde hair. Seeing Augustus turn his head, the girl quickly introduced herself. "Daphne Greengrass, Mr. Augustus Dumbledore, nice to meet you." Seeing the little hand stretched out by the girl, Augustus grabbed it and said, "Augustus Dumbledore, you can call me Augustus directly. I'm also very glad to meet you," Daphne said with a blushing face when she saw Augustus holding her hand tightly. "Let's start brewing the potion quickly." Augustus couldn't do anything more, took out his elder wand, waved it until the fire elf appeared, and small anthropomorphic fire figures walked away from the top of Augustus' wand come out. They started to light the fire, set up the cauldron, and took the broken Felix from Augustus. A group of little firemen had a great time. Seeing Augustus's magic, the classroom started to be noisy again, and everyone put down their work one after another, and began to watch little Pyro at work. Seeing that potions class was going to turn into Augustus's personal magic show, Snape stood up and roared, "Before get out of class is over, if you can't finish today's potion brewing, each person will deal with 100 snot-nosed caterpillars, and no gloves are allowed." As soon as the words fell, everyone hurried back to their tables, and began to brew their own potions. Looking at the leaving crowd, Augustus said to Daphne, "Let's start too." Daphne nodded with a blushing face, and began to weigh the snake's teeth. Daphne squeezed the brass weight tightly, looking a little nervous. Seeing the girl's movements, Augustus reminded helplessly, "You put too many snake teeth. Let me help you. After all, Professor Snape gave me the task." After speaking, Augustus began to teach the nervous girl, helping her weigh the medicinal materials needed, and then set up the pot and lit the fire. Augustus taught Daphne slowly, with eloquence, and kept encouraging the little girl who had no confidence. From time to time, he told some dirty things about Dumbledore, which made the girl cover her mouth and laugh desperately. Snape, who had been observing in secret, twitched his mouth. Originally, he assigned the worst student in Slytherin potions to this bastard, because he wanted to see his painful expression. Why did this damn talk? I even found him a little girlfriend. Isn't this pure and innocent? Snape had no choice but to start patrolling the classroom. When he saw someone who made a mistake, he sprayed the venom wildly. causing the whole classroom to suffer unspeakably. Harry and Ron were even targeted crazily. They were sprayed with venom, even when they stirred with their left hand. Seeing Daphne put the ground medicinal materials into the crucible one by one and start stirring evenly, Augustus nodded in relief. As time went by, the potion in the crucible gradually turned into the violet color described in the book. Daphne was very excited, and Augustus handed her a standard medicine bottle and said softly, "The last step is to put the medicine into the medicine bottle. Believe in yourself, and you can do it." Daphne nodded heavily, took the medicine bottle, and began to bottle it carefully. Finally, when the last drop of medicine was put into the bottle, Daphne jumped up excitedly, hugged Augustus, and shouted to us, "It worked." Crack. The sound of glassware breaking came from nearby. "Ladies, take it easy." Snape dragged out his tone, cast a cold look around, then walked to Augustus's side, and said coldly, "I think you can let go of Mr. Augustus, Miss Daphne." Like an electric shock, Daphne immediately let go of Augustus and acted like an ostrich, with steam billowing from her head. Snape didn't look at her anymore, picked up the medicine bottle to observe carefully, finally nodded reluctantly, and then said to Augustus, "This is just the first request. Have you prepared the Felix elixir?" Seeing Snape's hostile greeting, Augustus said confidently, "Of course." After finishing speaking, he took the Felicity elixir from the little fireman next to him and handed it to Professor Snape. Looking at the golden potion in front of him, Snape couldn't believe his eyes. Nimmer still has this kind of operation. This kid is really a monster. Looking at Snape, who was constantly checking, Augustus sneered in his heart. As a half-fire lord, he couldn't practice well with a bottle of Felix elixir, so he didn't want to commit suicide by swallowing dung. In the end, Snape had no choice but to throw the Felix elixir to Augustus and said with a blank expression, "A prize." Then he pointed to another potion brewed by Little Fireman and asked, "What is this?" Just as Augustus was about to answer, he heard a scream. Snape was attracted to it. Seeing this situation, Augustus said in his heart, "The opportunity has come." Chapter 29 Class Accidents. The screams were made by Neville and Seamus. An accident happened during the process of brewing the potion. The cauldron exploded, and the potion splashed all over their bodies. A bunch of scabies appeared on the two of them immediately, and they screamed on the ground in pain. The crowd next to them were also affected by the fish in the pond. Several girls also had scabies on their faces, crying loudly in grief. Professor Snape immediately came to the scene of the incident, looked at the two people rolling on the ground, and said with disdain, "Such a simple potion will make mistakes. It seems that your brains are filled with troll's snot. Gryffindor will deduct 10 points." After speaking, Snape pointed to Augustus and said loudly, "You still have to see when, Mr. Augustus. Don't hurry up and bring over the potion you made." Augustus smiled sinisterly at Snape and then said humbly, "Of course, it's Milner, Professor Snape." Augustus picked up the potion on the table and walked towards the scene of the incident. When he was about to arrive, he secretly directed the burnt cauldron with a levitation spell and flew towards a girl's face. No one could react to such an unexpected situation. At this moment, Augustus gave a loud shout. Professor took it. He said, and threw out the two bottles of potion in his hand. One bottle was sealed, and the other bottle was not sealed. Augustus pulled the girl away. Seeing the two bottles of potions flying towards him, Snape had no choice but to save the sealed bottle. The other bottle drew an arc in the air and fell firmly on Professor Snape's hair. Looking at the two who were still rolling all over the floor, Snape couldn't care less, handed the potion he had caught to the two, and said meanly, "Put it on, and I hope you don't turn ugly." Hearing Snape's words, and seeing that Neville and the others had almost used up the potion, the girls who were affected thought they were going to be disfigured, and cried louder. For a moment, the whole classroom was filled with the sound of girls crying. Those who heard it were sad, and those who saw it shed tears. Snape was also confused for a moment. I had no choice but to stand up, and said to the group of girls, "You can go to Mr. Augustus for help. He should be able to brew a large amount of potion in a short time." After reading it, Augustus glanced at it. Augustus rolled his eyes and threw the trouble to me again. "You wait for a few more minutes, you will see me." Augustus had no choice but to stand on the podium and shouted loudly, Now I want the help of all of you, and I will use magic to take over the potion you brewed later, and you all go back to the table." Seeing that the crowd was no longer dense, Augustus waved his elder wand and said, "The fire spirit appears." The cheerful little fireman flew to each student's workbench and began to take over the refining of potions. They were very busy. Seeing that the situation was under control, Augustus continued, "Okay, wait for a few minutes. The potion is ready. Apply it on the scabies. Don't worry, it won't leave scars." Snape looked at the classroom, still nodded silently, came to the podium, and said to Augustus, "Okay, go back to your seat. This is not where you should be." He beat the cook after dinner, a ruthless greasy man, Augustus thought bitterly, but he glanced at the potion liquid on Snape's head, and silently retreated to his seat. After all, he still had to watch a show. After a few minutes, the little fire people had finished boiling the potion, and the injured students hurriedly applied the potion on the scabies. A few anxious students got scalded on their hands as soon as the potion was ready. Cool. However, most of the students still have some common sense and wait for the potion to cool down before starting to operate. Seeing that most of the students were fine, Snape said, "Okay, that's all for this lesson, but I suggest you go to Madame Pomfrey's to check again, in order to avoid any sequelae. After all, this is just a student's work." What's more, Mr. Augustus perfectly completed the potion and healed his classmates, so Slytherin adds 20 points, but I hope some people will not be arrogant because of this and learn. Snape originally wanted to continue and give Augustus a break, but suddenly he saw a strand of what he thought was beautiful hair drifting past his eyes. Then there were bursts of exclamations in the classroom, and some people looked at Snape in disbelief and said tremblingly, "Teach your hair." Snape didn't feel well, so he quickly touched it with his hands, but pulled out a lot of hair. Looking at the hair in front of him, Snape couldn't believe his eyes, and continued to touch his head with his hands. In a few moments, there was not a single hair on Professor Snape's head, and even a smooth fly would split his head. Feeling the coolness on his head, Snape stood up abruptly, came to Augustus aggressively, supported his body with both hands, and asked Augustus fiercely face to face, "I hope you have a good explanation, Mr. Augustus Dumbledore." Hearing the gnashing of teeth on the other side, Augustus expressed that he was not panicked at all, and quickly pretended to be frightened, and said in a panic as he took out a bottle of potion from the side, "Oh, I'm sorry, Professor, I was eager to save people just now, and I took the wrong potion, but you also affirmed my behavior just now, and added points for Slytherin. I think you should forgive me." After finishing speaking, Augustus stared pitifully at Snape with his strange colored pupils. Snape's eyes were darkened by the kid's anger, and he almost lost his anger. "But I couldn't, so I ate back what I said, so I had to grit my teeth and say 2 words, get out of class is over." After finishing speaking, he was about to walk outside the classroom. Of course, Augustus would not let him go easily, so he pretended to remember just now, and slowly said to Professor Snape, "Oh, by the way, Professor, I added a powerful magic fixation spell to the potion for its effect. You have to remember that the hair grows out, and you have to wash your hair at least once every 3 days, otherwise the hair may fall out again." Snape turned his head and stared at Augustus, thinking about how he encountered such a thing, just like his grandfather, who tricked people. They all went to death. And can you change it? People, you can't leave me alone. I was short of breath for a while, and couldn't catch my breath, and passed out at the door of the classroom. The professor won't be dead. Seeing Snape fell to the ground, Daphne asked nervously. Augustus came to Snape's side, checked and stood up, speaking slowly. "It's okay, I was just in a hurry and passed out. You guys come over and carry the professor to the infirmary." 4 Slytherin boys hurried over, and at this moment a word came from Augustus's mind. The behavior of the host is detected, and it meets the action standards of the Traveser, and 100 magic points are obtained. Hearing this voice, Augustus was taken aback for a moment, and then looked at Professor Snape with more ferocious eyes. Chapter 30. Seeing the ferocious expression on Augustus's face, several Slytherin boys dare not go forward. Augustus looked at the boys and said, "Don't worry about me, send Professor Snape to the infirmary quickly." Only then did the Slytherin boys lift Professor Snape up, and then looked at Augustus with fear. Augustus nodded slightly, and the Slytherin boys rushed out immediately. Seeing that he looked like a Slytherin boy, Augustus asked Daphne beside him a little unsure. Am I scary? Why are they like this? Daphne didn't answer Augustus' question, but rolled her lovely eyes, and followed her classmates out of the classroom. Augustus shrugged helplessly, and walked out of the potions classroom silently. During dinner, all the students in the Hogwarts auditorium were discussing the fact that Professor Snape became bald. The twin brothers of Gryffindor even went to the long table of Slytherin deliberately, flattering Augustus. Oh, you are so great. You have done what we have always wanted to do, but dare not do. You are the king of mischief at Hogwarts. Augustus waved his hand, pretending to be pitiful, and said, I was just trying to save my classmates. It was just a terrible accident. I think Professor Snape will understand himself. The twin brothers didn't think so, and continued excitedly discussing future prank plans with Augustus. At this time, Professor McGonagall walked down from the teacher's chair with a serious face, and said to Augustus, I understand the specific situation, but you shouldn't do this. You should respect the professor. If Snape's long greasy hair is quite annoying, I think you should find a time to go to the infirmary to apologize to Professor Snape, but you are going to the headmaster's office tonight. Professor Flitwick and Headmaster Dumbledore are waiting for you there. After speaking, Professor McGonagall turned and left. After walking a few steps, he turned back and said, by the way, I forgot to tell you, today's password is Lemonzubeo. After dinner, Augustus came to the door of the principal's office on the 8th floor and said to the gargoyle, Lemon Snow Treasure. The gargoyle got out of the way, and a spiral staircase appeared in front of Augustus. Augustus climbed up the stairs. Before he came to the principal's office, I heard a voice from the principal's room. Oh Dumbledore, that kid is a real genius. Look what he gave me. It's going to revolutionize education. It was obviously Professor Flitwick's voice, and after a while, an old voice answered. I know, I always knew he was a real genius, but I'm still a little worried. After all, there is a lesson from that person. The voice was full of helplessness, but Professor Flurflever's voice sounded excitedly. What are you talking about? He is your blood, and I know Augustus is a good boy. Look at what he did this afternoon. The mysterious man will not help his classmates. As soon as Professor Flitwick's voice fell, Augustus directly entered the principal's office. Seeing Augustus come in, Professor Flitwick and Dumbledore showed a little embarrassment on their faces. Seeing the dull atmosphere, Augustus spoke directly. I know what you are thinking. You think I will be the next Voldemort, but I tell you very clearly that I will not be, because what I want is far from what a Voldemort can give me. After speaking, Augustus stared straight at Dumbledore, looking at the pair of different colored pupils. Dumbledore's heart could not be calm for a long time. Seeing that Dumbledore was silent, Augustus continued. Voldemort is just a piece of rubbish in my eyes. In order to pursue the so-called immortality, turning myself into that ghost is not what I want. What I want is to change the entire magical world. Augustus no longer hides what he wants to do. After all, what he wants to do is not something difficult to say, but an above-board revolution. Hearing Augustus's speech, Dumbledore seemed to have returned to that summer many years ago, in the beautiful Godric's Hollow. He met the man who was really entangled with his own destiny. At that time, the two of us, like the boy in front of us, wanted to change the world with our own power, but in the end we had to part ways, and finally became strangers. After a long silence, Dumbledore spoke. We never thought about it that way. We were just a little bit worried. After all, power can easily lead people to the end. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Augustus pouted contemptuously, and then said, You are my dear grandfather. You don't trust me so much. Are we still relatives? Facing Augustus' questioning, Dumbledore was momentarily at a loss for words, so he had to change the subject. Let's talk about those 3 books you gave Professor Flitwick. Seeing that the topic finally returned to the book, Professor Flitwick said excitedly, In the afternoon, I have already sent the books to the magazine, and they have already responded. You will receive this year's Best Newcomer Award, and we are going to report to the Ministry of Magic. If successful, these 3 books of yours will become textbooks for new students in the new school year. Hearing Professor Flitwick's words, Augustus was stunned for a moment, and it was done directly. Is it that simple? Seeing Augustus in a daze, Dumbledore continued to add, our teaching materials have not changed for hundreds of years, and you have really brought about a revolution in education. After speaking, Dumbledore took a deep look at Augustus, with mixed feelings in his heart. Tell me what you think. Professor Flitwick said, I agree, but I have to sign the book. I completed it under the guidance of Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. Augustus said, why? Professor Flitwick asked a little puzzled. Of course it is to avoid some unnecessary troubles. Think about it, you will regard me as a successor of that one. If it is said that I completed it independently, what will those people in the Ministry of Magic think? Augustus shrugged and said with some reproach. Professor Flitwick and Dumbledore touched their noses in embarrassment. Dumbledore said quickly, no problem, just do as Augustus said. By the way, if you succeed, you may be able to get a 3rd class mail-in medal. Augustus said with some disdain. It's only level 3, it's nothing interesting, I'll leave first, if there's nothing else to do. After Augustus finished speaking, he saluted Dumbledore and Professor Flitwick, then turned and left the principal's office. Watching Augustus leave, Professor Flitwick also left the principal's office. Dumbledore, who was sitting on his desk seat, watched Augustus leaving, shook his head with a complicated expression, and said, he is really too similar to you, equally talented and ambitious. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Principal Black in the Frame said to Dumbledore, haven't you made up your mind yet? You know, that child can't even be considered a real human being. You have to be responsible to the magic world. Dumbledore didn't answer, and turned and left the headmaster's room. Chapter 31 The Dream of Eden. Coming out of the principal's office, Augustus was always angry, expressing his anger at Dumbledore's suspicion. How could he suspect that he wanted to be Voldemort, a dignified time traveler, just to become that kind of rural terrorist? When he came to the Slytherin common room, Augustus exuded an aura of keeping strangers close, which made those little witches who wanted to say hello to him afraid to approach him. There is no way. After all, no one can stand such an insult and think that he wants to become Voldemort. What an insult, Augustus thought bitterly in his heart. With resentment towards Dumbledore, Augustus went straight to bed, making Draco and Goyle look confused, but they didn't dare to ask any more questions. On the morning of the second day, Hogwarts Auditorium, Augustus was eating breakfast with distracted eyes, because he had been thinking about his plans for the night last night, and he didn't sleep well. At this moment, a soft and cute voice came over. Can I sit next to you? Augusto looked back, and saw that it was the blonde lovely Daphne. Augustus smiled and gestured to please sit down. Daphne was very happy, and sat directly next to Augustus, and began to talk to Augustus. Let's chat. When the other Slytherin girls saw it, they followed suit, and ran to Augustus. Looking at Yinky and Yanan around him, Augustus felt a little uncomfortable and said hastily, I have to apologize to Professor Snape today, so I'm sorry, and I'll go first. After speaking and leaving in a hurry, Hermione on the Gryffindor long table saw Daphne and a group of Slytherin girls surrounding Augustus, feeling an indescribable feeling in her heart. Obviously I came first, making friends with Augustus, and making an appointment to take the train together. Obviously I came first. Why did this happen? Hermione had to keep poking the oatmeal in front of her with a spoon. Seeing Hermione's appearance, Harry and Ron shook their heads inexplicably, without thinking too much, and continued to cook crazily. Arriving at Mrs. Pomley's infirmary, Augustus saw Draco and Professor Snape. Draco kept urging Mrs. Pomley, while Professor Snape was staring at the ceiling with empty eyes. Under the sunlight, there was a slight reflection on the bald head. Draco saw Augustus come in and asked, "Why are you here? There is flying class this morning. Let's go there quickly." After speaking, he continued to urge Mrs. Pomley. Seeing Draco, Augustus was slightly surprised and asked back, "What are you doing here?" Hearing Augustus' question, Draco was a little embarrassed, so he had to speak slowly. "Didn't I come to the infirmary yesterday?" Mrs. Pomley said, "After examining me, that I had suffered severe mental persecution, so I must re-examine today." "Spiritual persecution? Who persecuted you?" Augustus asked suspiciously. Draco looked at the innocent Augustus in front of him and was speechless for a while, thinking, who persecuted me? How do you say such words? You don't even know what you did to my young heart yesterday, how much damage was done. After Mrs. Pomley's examination was over, Draco left the infirmary in one stride and never spoke to Augustus again. Seeing Draco leave in a hurry, Augustus didn't think much about it, thinking that Draco was busy going to flight lessons. Augustus silently walked to Professor Snape's bed, looking at the bald Professor Snape with empty eyes and haggard face. Augustus actually felt a little bit of guilt in his heart. So Augustus was about to sincerely apologize to Professor Snape, but before he could say anything, Professor Snape suddenly jumped up, grabbed Augustus' arm, and said excitedly, "You can practice that potion, right? Give me a few more bottles, and I'll agree to any conditions." Hearing Professor Snape's words, Augustus rolled his eyes and said silently, "Of course, I can practice that potion, but I want to see the effect first. Open your occlumency and let me see your memories from last night." Snape stared straight at Augustus, and just as Augustus was about to explain something, Snape whispered something. So Augustus used remembrance to see Snape's memories of last night. Waking up from the memory, Augustus couldn't help laughing, because he saw that Snape did meet Lily's soul in the dream, but he kept his big bald head on during the conversation. And at the end of the dream, Lily also said to Snape, "Your hairstyle looks good on Severus." Looking at Augustus, who was already laughing so hard that he couldn't straighten his waist, Snape felt that he should directly give the bastard a killing curse, but thinking of Lily, he still held back his anger and said to Augustus, "You can practice this potion, which means that you have already studied the soul. Please tell us your conditions." Hearing this, Augustus also stopped laughing and said to Snape seriously, "It depends on what you can afford." Snape hardly hesitated for a moment, looked into Augustus' eyes and said seriously, "Everything." Hearing Snape's answer, Augustus nodded and said silently, "Smart people like professors should know that I can't live an ordinary life, so I need to build my own team. We still need talents like professors." After talking about Augustus, he took out several bottles of blue potion and a piece of parchment and put them in front of Snape. Snape picked up the potion and the parchment, looked at it carefully, and then looked at Augustus in shock. Seeing his expression, Augustus waved his hand and said calmly, "There is no doubt. With the professor's knowledge, you should be able to tell the truth from the fake. I want to publish this article, but please sign the article as my instructor. Don't rush to refuse. After all, genius is admirable, but too much genius will make people afraid, so I hope the professor will help me block it." Snape thought for a moment, nodded, and said, "Also, it's not the only request. Of course, I also hope that the professor can refine a large amount of potions and then sell them on the market. After all, if you want to form a team, you still need financial support. These two conditions are the only two conditions for now. Will you agree?" Snape nodded. Seeing that Snape had been dealt with, Augustus took out those bottles of pink potions from the system space and placed them in front of Snape. Snape accepted the potions with a blank expression. Augustus gave Snape a detailed explanation of the technical details of the MP potion, and it was not until noon that Augustus bid farewell to Snape. Looking at the back of the leaving boy, Snape still couldn't help asking, "What is the name of this potion?" "The dream of the Garden of Eden. Maybe only in the dream can I say sorry to my regrets." The boy's voice came faintly from the corridor. Chapter 30 to the Quidditch Reform. Coming out of the infirmary, Augustus slowly slipped into the auditorium. It was lunchtime, and the auditorium was full of people. Augustus looked around, but found no sign of Hermione. This little girl must have gone to the library, Augustus thought silently, and walked directly to Slytherin's dining table without paying attention. Seeing Augustus approaching, the little snakes of Slytherin quickly gave up a seat. Augustus shrugged and sat on the vacant seat indifferently. Just as he sat down, Draco quickly walked over and sat down next to Augustus, regardless of whether the other party wanted to listen or not. He started talking, as if no one else was there. "Oh, it's really a pity that you didn't go to the flying lesson. You should take a look at the stupid look of Neville Longbottom. If you are not lucky, he should break his neck today." Seeing that Augustus wasn't listening, Draco didn't feel embarrassed and continued to talk endlessly. And Harry Potter, he actually wanted to stand up for that silly boy, but was caught by Professor McGonagall. Now he should be expelled from school. After speaking, he looked at Augustus radiantly, as if he had done a very remarkable thing. Augustus glanced at him, then pointed at the entrance of the auditorium, as if nothing had happened, and said gloatingly, "I don't think Harry will be fired, and he seems to be getting some benefits." Draco looked in the direction of Augustus' finger, and saw Harry and Ron happily walking into the auditorium, heading to the long table of Gryffindor, and having a lively discussion with the people around them. Looking at the scene in front of him, Draco couldn't believe it, but he still sent Goyle to find out the news. Goyle reluctantly put down the chicken leg in his hand, and when he saw Draco's expression, he silently walked towards the Gryffindor long table. After a while, Goyle brought the truth, that not only was Harry not expelled, but he became a Gryffindor seeker. Draco felt as if he had been struck by lightning, and then expressed his anger. "It's not fair. There's never been a first year on the Quidditch team, and I'm going to write to my father, so he can fire Harry Potter." Looking at the little dragon in front of him, who was spouting fire everywhere because of anger, Augustus smiled and said slowly, "You seem to like Quidditch." Draco was taken aback by what Augustus said, and quickly replied, "Of course, there's no wizard who doesn't like Quidditch, the most popular sport in the wizarding world." Hearing Draco's answer, Augustus pouted contemptuously, and said with some disdain, "Oh yeah, in my opinion, Quidditch is a very stupid sport. It not only lacks fairness, but also highlights individual heroism. As long as the seeker catches the golden snitch, the game can end." Speechless. Hearing what Augustus said, Drake immediately wanted to refute, but Augustus interrupted his speech with a wave of his hand, and continued, "Actually, the Quidditch movement should be reformed. Only reform can make it more interesting. For example, increasing the time limit and having substitutions. All players can catch the snitch, but the snitch can't end the game, but only get a lot of points, which makes the game full of reversible factors. And there should be referees, detailed rules of the game, penalties for fouls, etc. Only in this way can Quidditch be called a sport." After listening to what Augustus said, Draco remained silent, because he had never known that sports could have so many rules, since he was a child in the magic world. And with the addition of these rules, the sport seems to be more interesting. Looking at the silent Draco, Augustus knew that he already found these modern sports far more interesting than Quidditch, which hadn't changed for hundreds of years. The reason why Augustus wanted to talk so much to Draco was because he had a very important purpose, which was to reform sports in the magical world. Thinking of the Premier League La Liga World Cup in the past, which of these sports competitions did not make a lot of money? As long as I have Quidditch in my hands, I'm afraid that I will not make money. Augustus continued. And in order to ensure the fairness and justice of the game, a Quidditch sports committee should be established to organize and coordinate the Quidditch games across the UK, such as player selection, transfer, game promotion, and the unification of flying brooms. Otherwise, if you use the Nimbus 2000 and the Comet 1, it will be nothing. Of course, this matter requires a highly respected figure to coordinate all parties. I think your father, Mr. Lucius Malfoy, should be able to." Hearing Augustus mention his father, Draco scratched his head and said unconfidently, "My father may not necessarily be willing to join this matter, but I can contact him on my behalf." Hearing this, Augustus pouted contemptuously, and silently thought in his heart, if Lucius couldn't even see such a big benefit, then he would stop messing around in the future. After all, reforming the Quidditch game is a real way to make money. Not to mention other things, you can make a lot of money just from illegal gambling, not to mention the huge amount of money you can get when the game officially starts. Power, don't you see how lucrative FIFA is in the Muggle world? Augustus was too lazy to continue talking nonsense with Draco, so he asked him to take out the paper and pen, and he recounted the key points of Quidditch reform and the direction of future development in detail, and asked him to memorize them one by one down. Then let him relay all the words he said to his father in detail. Draco had no choice but to listen to Augustus, silently wrote down everything he said on paper, and finally handed the parchment to him for inspection. Looking at Draco's resentful eyes, Augustus was too embarrassed to prostitute him for nothing, so he said to him, "Okay, you do me this favor. I'll go talk to Professor Snape on Sunday and ask you to join Slytherin's Quidditch team. Now hurry up and eat." Hearing that, Draco was elated, carefully folded the parchment with the original words of Augustus, carefully put it in his jacket pocket, and then buried himself in cooking like crazy. Seeing Drake's actions, Augustus nodded in satisfaction. He himself believed that the Quidditch sport with the blessing of modern ball game rules would definitely be popular in the magic world, and he would be able to get a lot of galleons by then. Now I have two ways to make money. Snape can help me refine potions, and Lucius Malfoy can help me control the biggest sport in the magic world. His grand goal is moving towards reality step by step. Chapter 33 The Ministry of Magic comes. After lunch, Augustus asked Draco, "What class is there in the afternoon?" "History of Magic. I heard that the professor who taught us history of magic is a ghost. The class is extremely boring and will only make people drowsy," Draco said helplessly. Hearing this, Augustus was non-committal, stood up and walked out of the auditorium. Seeing Augustus's movements, the little Slytherin snakes quickly lined up and followed behind Augustus and Draco. The classroom of the History of Magic class is on the 4th floor of Hogwarts Castle. It is said that Professor Spence became a ghost because he forgot to take his body away in class. "We are here, it's here," Draco said to Augustus. Everyone came to the door of a classroom. The door of the classroom was open. Augustus looked inside, but found no trace of the ghost. There was only a little brown ball of hair carefully reading a large tome on his seat book of. Augustus smiled and went straight to the little hairball. Seeing that the little hairball didn't find his trace, he stretched out his evil hand and stroked the little hairball's head. Hermione felt something strange on her head, looked up, and saw Augustus's smiling face, then knocked off the salty pig's hand that was doing evil on her head, and then turned her head away from looking at him. Seeing the girl who was sulking, Augustus quickly sat down on the seat next to her and prepared to use his 3-inch tongue to coax her into peace. But before Augustus could speak, a petite golden figure sat beside Augustus, and then the blonde lully spoke. "Hello, my name is Daphne Greengrass. You are Hermione Granger. I think we can be friends." After speaking, Daphne stretched out her right hand to Hermione. Hearing these words, Hermione immediately turned her head and stared at Daphne, then also stretched out her right hand and held Daphne's hand tightly, but her eyes never moved. Seeing the actions of the two, Augustus suddenly felt uncomfortable. He seemed to have fallen into a strange place. The surrounding air seemed to freeze, and Augustus felt that he had difficulty breathing. Just when Augustus was in a dilemma, a green figure walked into the magic history classroom and said to Augustus, "Mr. Augustus Dumbledore, please come out. The Ministry of Magic wants to see you." "I'll come right now. Thank you, Professor McGonagall," Augustus answered at once, as if a drowning man grasped at a straw. After speaking, he got up and left without any delay. Augustus walked to Professor McGonagall and said to the professor, "Let's go. Don't keep the adults of the Ministry of Magic waiting." Professor McGonagall nodded suspiciously, thinking when did this kid become so polite, but he still took Augustus to the principal's office. As the vice principal of Hogwarts and the professor of practical management affairs, Professor McGonagall is naturally very familiar with Hogwarts Castle, and she led the absent-minded Augustus to the principal's office along the way. Augustus was still recalling the terrible experience just now. To be honest, he didn't have any thoughts about Hermione and Daphne. After all, the combined age of the two lives was almost 30 years old, which made him feel very bad for an 11-year-old girl. In other words, I don't think I'm that perverted yet. But starting from the actual situation, it seems that the situation has become a little out of his control. The terrifying Shurfield just now made Augustus, who had never had any love experience, feel scared. Soon, Professor McGonagall led Augustus to the gargoyle, and Professor McGonagall said facing the gargoyle, "Cockroach pile." The gargoyle got out of the way, and Augustus and Professor McGonagall walked along the spiral staircase to the principal's office. "Connelly, long time no see, and everyone from the Ministry of Magic, welcome to Hogwarts. Come and taste the dessert I prepared." As soon as Augustus and Professor McGonagall arrived at the door of the principal's office, they heard Dumbledore speak enthusiastically. Looking into the headmaster's room, Dumbledore smiled all over his face, beckoned everyone to sit down, and waved the elder wand. A cup of honey tea and sugar biscuits appeared on the big table in the room without warning. "Long time no see, Dumbledore." A middle-aged man with a slightly fatter figure responded politely. Maybe he didn't even notice it himself. Didn't he feel his face turned upside down, as if he wanted to try his best to maintain his majesty in front of this old man? "Yeah, long time no see. You have been reluctant to write to me in recent years." Dumbledore smiled slightly, stroked his beard, and winked at the middle-aged man in front of him. "Ahem. It's time to get down to business. This is Mr. Augustus Dumbledore." Seeing the embarrassment of the man in front of him, Dumbledore quickly pointed to Augustus at the door and introduced him to everyone. Seeing Dumbledore changing the subject, Cornelius Fudge was unwilling to say anything and quickly turned everyone's attention to Augustus. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, Augustus gave a slight salute and then walked straight to Dumbledore. Seeing the young man ignoring him gorgeously, Cornelius Fudge's face became ugly. Seeing Augustus' actions, Dumbledore smiled, and then Augustus introduced. "This is Mr. Cornelius Fudge, Minister for Magic." "Mr. Minister, I'm Augustus Dumbledore." Ignoring the minister's liver-like complexion, Augustus introduced himself casually. "Okay." Cornelius Fudge straightened up, pretended to be calm, and responded lightly. Then he looked at Dumbledore again, and said, "After verification by professionals from the Ministry of Magic and the Sirs of Merlin, the 3 spell books you improved are indeed very good. Although they are based on your grandfather's research results, they can be summed up, and they are enough to win the 3rd class of the Order of Merlin. But we still have one question." He paused intentionally, then continued with a serious tone. "There are many people in the Ministry of Magic who suspect that these are not the research results of August Dumbledore at all, but were all completed by Headmaster Albus Dumbledore. In fact, Cornelius Fudge really hopes that there will be a magic genius in the magic world, so that he can prove that his governance is effective. But this genius is also surnamed Dumbledore. This is something that our ministers cannot tolerate. Dumbledore, there must never be another genius like Albus in the Lido family." "Then how do you want me to prove it?" Looking at the fat man in front of him, with the face of a villain, Augustus said unceremoniously. Chapter 34 Fire Shield. Hearing Augustus' disrespectful words, Cornelius Fudge suddenly felt an unknown anger and was about to explode when he heard Dumbledore say calmly, "Is this the ministry's decision or your own?" "This, no comment," said Cornelius Fudge, emphatically and angrily, and went on without waiting for Dumbledore to speak. "Albus, no matter what, the child is innocent, but I still can't believe that an 11-year-old child can sum up such a systematic magic release technique, don't you?" Cornelius Fudge spoke more and more vigorously, and when he was about to make a long speech, Augustus interrupted forcefully. "Stop talking nonsense. I don't know what conflicts you have with my grandfather, and I don't want to know. Tell me how you want me to prove it." The speech was interrupted, and he was asked such a forceful rhetorical question. Mr. Minister couldn't hold back his face, so he touched the brim of his hat and prepared to continue speaking. The talent of Augustus Dumbledore is beyond doubt. At this moment, a gloomy voice suddenly came from the ears of everyone. Severus Snape in black robe quietly appeared at the door of the principal's office like a ghost, being interrupted one after another. Mr. Fudge was very angry. He turned his head angrily and prepared to have a strong language output to the person who interrupted his speech. But seeing Snape's appearance, the minister was a little dazed, but he still said forcefully, "Sorry, this is the headmaster's office of Hogwarts. The Ministry of Magic has important matters to discuss. Please do not show up at the scene, so please go out." Mr. Augustus Dumbledore is a student of my college. As the head of Slytherin House, I think I'm qualified to appear on this scene. Snape walked into the room, regardless of whether the fat man with a round face flushed with anger was the Minister of Magic or not. He said with a blank expression, "Severus Snape?" Mr. Cornelius Fudge looked at the shiny bald head and asked suspiciously, "Augustus Dumbledore's talent is beyond doubt." Snape ignored Mr. Cornelius Fudge's puzzled expression and continued to speak expressionlessly, as if he was stating a very normal fact. Professor Severus Snape, I don't think even you can vouch for Augustus Dumbledore. After all, you teach potions and we're talking about spells. Cornelius Fudge said with a sneer. His tone was already quite bad. Of course, Minister, I have only come to submit to you and the Ministry a trivial potion study of my dear student, Augustus Dumbledore. After finishing speaking, Snape took out 3 glass bottles containing blue potion and a piece of parchment full of words from his sleeve, and said sarcastically, "Oh, by the way, today we are discussing charms. If you didn't bring along a group of senior potions experts from the Ministry of Magic, then you may have to bring these research results back to the Ministry for research." After Snape finished speaking, he handed the 3 bottles of potion and the piece of parchment to the accompanying members of the Ministry of Magic, and then continued to speak in a strange manner. Although the research on potions this time is not very profound, if the so-called potions experts in your department cannot conduct thorough research, I think Mr. Minister can still ask for the support of Headmaster Dumbledore. After finishing speaking, Snape shook the non-existent heir, folded his hands on his chest, and looked at the minister with a gloomy face. Seeing Snape's greasy face with a sneer, Cornelius Fudge couldn't help cursing inwardly. Is there something wrong with each of them, and they keep interrupting their own speeches after they finish talking? Shouldn't their majestic Minister of Magic be respected? Ahem, Minister, let me talk about business first. Holding the potion and the parchment in his hand, the secretary looked at his minister who was already scolding his mother with anger, and had no choice but to change the subject, to relieve the heavy atmosphere, and at the same time secretly scolded his minister in his heart. It's not good for me to offend anyone, but I want to offend this ancestor in front of me. Don't you see, his grandfather and dean, one is the greatest wizard Dumbledore, and the other is the potion master Severus Snape. This is not a simple role in other people's territory. If this is a shame, I'm afraid that some of my own will have to confess here. Okay, let's get down to business. So if Augustus Dumbledore cannot provide valid proof, his research results will not be recognized, and the award of the Merlin Medal of the 3rd class will be suspended. Cornelius Fudge said, quite dissatisfied. May I ask if your lord is deaf? If necessary, you can go to Mrs. Pangley to have a look. I have asked you many times. How do you want me to prove it? Augustus said, quite dissatisfied. Obviously, I have done some things on purpose and signed on the book that I completed the book with the support of my grandfather, and this dam is still asking for trouble for me. If there is no signature, I must not let the minister in front of me directly scared to have a heart attack. Okay, since you want to prove yourself, then I will give you a chance. As long as you cast a spell that convinces us all, I will approve your research results. Hearing what Augustus said, Cornelius Fudge was about to go mad with rage, and he spoke slowly through gritted teeth. It's so simple. Then why didn't you say earlier? Well, I have to catch up on dinner. Let's go to the Hogwarts open space, and I will show you what real magic is. Augustus responded bluntly. As soon as the words fell, Augustus directly summoned Heir, and the apparition phantom left the scene directly. When everyone saw Augustus using the phoenix to hide his phantom, they all showed surprise expressions. After all, no one except Dumbledore knew that Augustus had a phoenix. The minister suddenly felt guilty, but he still pretended to be calm and led the crowd to the open space of Hogwarts. In the open space of Hogwarts, Augustus stood there alone. Seeing the crowd rushing over, he took out his elder wand and said contemptuously to Cornelius Fudge, "I hope there is nothing wrong with your feet. Otherwise, if you fall, we Hogwarts will not be responsible." After finishing speaking, without waiting for Mr. Fudge's reaction, he bowed to everyone and then said gracefully, "Okay, professors, and of course my dear grandfather, and my beloved minister, let me, who is humble, show my insignificant magic." After finishing speaking, Augustus drew a circle around it with his elder wand and said at the same time, "Protego Diabolica Fire Shield Body." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35. As Augustus's body swayed, a circle of faint blue flames ignited around Augustus, and the terrifying blue fiend fire sent out waves of threatening heat, causing everyone to retreat again and again. Fiery. Seeing the scene in front of him, Mr. Cornelius Fudge couldn't believe his eyes, pointed at Augustus and said tremblingly. Then he turned to Dumbledore and said to Dumbledore, pretending to be calm while suppressing the fear in his heart, "This is Fiend Fi. How dare he do this? This matter will stop here. I cannot hold him accountable. Let him stop this terrible magic right now." Professor Snape, next to him, hearing Mr. Cornelius Fudge's speech, curled his lips and said with disdain, "Our wise minister doesn't know that Fiend Fi cannot stop casting spells on his own." Professor McGonagall directly ignored Mr. Fudge's speech and said to Dumbledore a little anxiously, "It's better to stop this terrible magic as soon as possible. Fiend Fire is too dangerous. If he is not controlled, he will destroy the entire Hogwarts." Dumbledore didn't speak. He looked at the boy surrounded by blue flames, and his thoughts drifted away. "Okay, let's stop here. You can handle the rest on your own. Forgive me for not accompanying you any longer." Seeing that Dumbledore hadn't expressed his opinion, Mr. Cornelius Fudge became a little annoyed. He said a word and turned around to leave the scene with the Ministry of Magic personnel. "Are you leaving like this? My magic has just begun. It's really sad. It seems that I want to keep everyone here." Seeing that the staff of the Ministry of Magic were about to leave, Augustus said loudly. After speaking, Augustus waved his bone elder wand forward, and the dark blue flames immediately formed a wall of fire, blocking everyone in the Ministry of Magic. Augustus knew that it was impossible to operate through magic in Hogwarts Castle, so he wanted to go and ask himself if he would agree. From the very beginning, when he saw Cornelius Fudge, Augustus didn't like this guy very much. This fat man reminded him of the office director who crazily squeezed him in his previous life. In my previous life, I was just an ordinary person with no abilities, so I could only swallow my anger. Now I'm a time traveler with the most incomparable magic talent in this world. Today, I will let this minister roll his ass with a rolling pin to open his eyes. What on earth do you want to do? Attack the officials of the Ministry of Magic, but you will be imprisoned in Azkaban. Looking at the blue wall of fire in front of him, Cornelius Fudge lost his composure and yelled loudly, "Of course not. Whoever dares to attack our beloved minister, I just humbly keep everyone here. After all, this is a matter of my honor." Seeing the fat man in front of him lose his composure, Augustus still said gracefully, "Okay, professors, my dear grandfather, and my dear minister, please be patient. The real magic show will officially begin now." After speaking, Augustus bowed gracefully, and then slowly waved his wand. His movements were as gentle as a swan dancing in a lake. Following the actions of Augustus, the berserk blue flames gradually calmed down, just like the calm and indifferent sea surface under a sunny day. Looking at the calm blue flame in front of him, the Secretary of the Ministry of Magic did not feel any fear, but a sense of peace and tranquility, and wanted to reach out and touch the blue flame. As soon as he stretched out his hand, another hand appeared and roughly pulled it back. Looking at the idiot in front of him, Snape said coldly without any emotion, "If you want to kill yourself, you should go back to the Ministry of Magic first, and don't die on the grounds of Hogwarts." The secretary was still a little annoyed at being treated so roughly, but when he heard Professor Snape's words, he felt a chill down his back. What a beautiful thing is fire, which brings death to all things and raises all things from the ashes. "Well, gentlemen, let our music reach its climax," Augustus said softly. His voice was very soft, as gentle as a white feather gently falling on the surface of a spotless lake. Seeing Fiend Fire calm down, Mr. Cornelius Fudge, who felt slightly relaxed, felt his heart constrict involuntarily when he heard Augustus' words, and an ominous premonition sprouted in his heart. Augustus was not in the mood to observe the changes in his face either. Looking at the faint blue fierce flame in front of him, he couldn't help feeling an indescribable excitement in his heart. He continued to wave his wand, but the range of his movements became significantly larger, as if a magnificent movement had entered a tense climax, allowing him, as a conductor, to conduct with selflessness. Following the actions of Augustus, the blue fiend fire began to become violent again. Just like the surface of the sea hit by a tropical storm, the huge waves were unstoppable. The faint blue flames climbed up and turned into a terrifying flame storm. The scorching air waves swept over everyone's cheeks, declaring fierce fire and the terrifying temperature to them. Dumbledore had no choice but to use defensive magic and put the professors and the Ministry of Magic, whose legs were shaking, into the defensive cover. Oh dear grandfather, I guess it's not enough for you to protect these people. Look behind you, Augustus said softly. Because the huge flame storm was too conspicuous, everyone in the Hogwarts castle also came to the open space one after another, wanting to watch this terrifying magic up close. What are you doing out here? All go back to class. It's very dangerous here, Professor McGonagall said seriously. No one moved their feet. After all, no matter whether they were pure-blood wizards or muggle-born wizards, they had never seen or even heard of such terrifying magic in this world. This is a display of a completely different level. In their eyes, this is the power of the gods. Everyone's eyes on the boy in the flames have changed. The Slytherin students looked at Augustus with an indescribable fanaticism. The power they were looking for began to manifest in front of them infinitely in this young man. Seeing that everyone didn't want to leave, Dumbledore sighed helplessly and waved his hand to bring everyone under the protection of the magic barrier. Seeing that the atmosphere group was already in place, Augustus touched the ring of the God of Law on the little finger of his left hand and said something in his heart. All 6 gears open. The ring of the God of Law in the shape of a hexagram, with 6 sapphires on it, all lit up with a brilliant luster, and the magic power stored in it for more than 10 days began to instill in Augustus without distinction. It allowed him to have a magical power comparable to Dumbledore for a short time. Although it made his body very painful, but looking at the fearful and awe-inspiring eyes of everyone in front of him, Augustus decided to show his strongest magical power. Please stand firm, especially the minister. Let us enter the climax of this magic together. Chapter 36. After finishing speaking, the golden pupil of Augustus' left eye was rekindled, and it was still dazzling even in the firelight all over the sky. The majestic magic power was instilled into Augustus' body from the ring of the God of Law. Then use the arm to transmit it to the Elder Wand. The majestic magic power makes the emeralds of the Elder Wand emit bright light, and the wand is also cheering, dedicating its loyalty to the upcoming great cause. As if the gorgeous movement had reached its climax, Augustus, the conductor, also began to get excited. Augustus waved his magic wand in a big way, commanding the non-existent band, playing the magic song together. Triumph. The blue flame continued to expand, and finally 4 blue flame phoenixes flew out from the flames. They hovered above everyone's heads, singing loudly. Hearing the clear and crisp cry of the phoenix, everyone present seemed to have forgotten that the body of the phoenix was made up of fierce fire that could burn everything, and instead they were deeply intoxicated by it. His magic control has reached such a point. What kind of monster is this? I believe you know, Dumbledore. If this child walks into that person's path, the entire British wizarding world, no, it is the entire magical world, that will face annihilation. Looking at the flying phoenix, Professor McGonagall said to Dumbledore worriedly. That's why we have to educate him. No matter how powerful he is, he's still just a child, isn't it, Minerva? Dumbledore said to Professor McGonagall with a smile, but there were already monstrous waves in his heart. He is so much like you. When you were young, even his talent has surpassed you and me. Can he really achieve the goal that neither of us has achieved before? As you said, for the greater good. Looking at the young man in front of him who was unleashing his magical talent wantonly, Dumbledore's thoughts drifted away again. This is impossible. How could an 11-year-old child have such a terrifying magical talent? Mr. Cornelius Fudge, looking at the hovering flame phoenix, said to himself with an expression of disbelief. Snape looked at the delirious minister in front of him, sneered, and thought silently in his heart. He may really be able to achieve that goal, but he may not be able to. We will definitely meet Lily again. Withdrawing from his thoughts, Snape stared at the young man in the flames with piercing eyes. For the Hogwarts students who came to serve as the atmosphere group, they couldn't help feeling strange in their hearts when they saw Augustus' unimaginable magic release. The students of Ravenclaw lamented that another genius had appeared in Slytherin. The Hufflepuffs just thought it was a different kind of fireworks display, and of course they were genuinely happy that Hogwarts had another genius. The Gryffindor students felt a little complicated. They were sincerely happy that a genius Dumbledore appeared again in Hogwarts. I also feel that I should discuss it with Professor McGonagall. The Sorting Hat must have made a mistake. How could the genius of the Dumbledore family go to Slytherin? Augustus should have come to Gryffindor like his grandfather, and then the two strongest wizards of this century and the next century will both graduate from the great Gryffindor College. The students of Slytherin and a group of pureblood wizards led by Draco felt that a demon king stronger than Voldemort was born, and they, like their parents, had come to a turning point in history. Seeing the people in front of him, Augustus felt a lot of emotions rushing towards him, including joy, fear and even more fear. Of course, the most he felt was respect. This is a feeling that Augustus has never experienced in his previous life. As an ordinary person or a loser in his previous life, the feeling Augustus got was ignorance, of course more contempt. Until this moment, Augustus didn't really realize what it feels like to master power. Looking at the flame phoenix above his head, Augustus originally wanted to end the magic show, but he felt the emotions of everyone, an indescribable emotion, rising from Augustus' heart. An unknown voice kept echoing in my mind. No, that's not enough. They're just afraid of you. Release the most primitive desire in your heart. Come and let them see what real power is, and let them offer their loyalty in front of absolute power. Augustus raised the Bone Elder wand above his head. The golden pupil of his left eye shone like molten gold, and the gorgeous and strange mandala pattern appeared at the bottom of the golden pupil again. Augustus said with a blank expression. Combustion. Gorgeous golden flames appeared on the 4 blue flame phoenixes. The phoenixes let out a miserable cry, and the blue flames were apt and melted by the even more terrifying golden flames. The most terrifying fiend fire in the magic world was killed by another kind of flame. Looking at the weird scene in front of them, everyone present showed a dumbfounded expression. Coming. Looking at the golden flames that had turned into a ball, Augustus continued to speak expressionlessly. The golden flames fused together like a huge flaming golden egg, and as Augustus' words fell, the golden egg seemed to be about to hatch. The golden flame squirmed a few times, and then quickly turned into a giant flame dragon. The flame dragon danced in the air a few times, then quickly landed beside Augustus, roaring loudly at the people hiding in the magic shield. What kind of monster is this? Looking at the flaming dragon in front of him, Mr. Cornelius Fudge could no longer maintain his superficial composure. He slumped on the ground and pointed at the flaming dragon in front of him tremblingly. Stop, Dumbledore, think of a way, or that horrible monster will destroy the entire Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall said anxiously. Okay, I think our minister can already recognize your magical talent. Stop it. Dumbledore looked at the boy next to the dragon and said calmly. Professor McGonagall next to her wanted to persuade her. After all, she still couldn't believe that an 11-year-old child could control such terrible magic. It seems that our minister is still unstable. After all, I have reminded him many times. Please don't blame me. Seeing the ugly appearance of the round-faced fat man in front of him, the nameless fire in Augustus's heart also gradually dissipated. Okay, let's get into the final chapter of this show. Augustus spoke plainly, and then waved out the last note of the movement with his wand. The flame dragon immediately condensed into a ball, and finally emitted a dazzling light that made it impossible to look directly at it. Looking at the light in front of them, many people cursed inwardly. It's over. The magic is out of control after all. I may have to explain it here today. However, the expected burning sensation did not come, and everyone slowly opened their eyes, and then saw another scene of unbelievable reality. The giant flame dragon disappeared, replaced by beautiful flame butterflies. The flame butterflies danced beautifully to their heart's content. Wherever they flew, the trees and grasses that had been burned by the flames miraculously returned to their original appearance. Okay, that's the end of today's magic show. The boy's plain voice came faintly, and everyone saw that there was only a boy standing there who bowed gracefully. Chapter 37 Dialogue again. Looking at the open space, that was no different from usual, and the boy who was bowing gracefully. Almost everyone felt like a dream in their hearts, as if the monstrous magic flame just now had never appeared in this open space. Everything was so calm and indifferent. Augustus straightened his body, supported his body with exhausted manner, and walked slowly towards the crowd. Seeing the young man walking towards them slowly, everyone felt that the air around them seemed to freeze, making it impossible to breathe normally. "Dear Minister, I think the magic just now has proved my talent to you, right?" Facing Cornelius Fudge, Augustus said with a smirk. Looking at the boy who was smiling but not smiling, Mr. Cornelius Fudge regretted it to death. "Originally, I thought that I had discovered Dumbledore's tricks, so I could use the young man in front of me to make a fuss, to hit Dumbledore's lofty prestige, and thus stabilize my position. But now, not only has the goal not been achieved, but he has also made a fool of himself in front of everyone, and it seems that he has provoked a powerful enemy that he cannot afford." Mr. Cornelius Fudge got up from the ground, tidied up his clothes, and then said with a forced calm, "Yes, you are right. Through my observation, on behalf of the Ministry of Magic, I formally recognize the research results you submitted before, and you will be awarded the third-class mail-in medal." After speaking, Mr. Fudge managed to squeeze out a smile, stretched out his right hand, and wanted to shake hands with the boy in front of him to make peace. Seeing his actions, Augustus smiled contemptuously, but still stretched out his right hand and shook hands with the minister in front of him. "After all, I still need this trash in front of me to continue whitewashing peace, and let this trash stay in the position of Minister of Magic before my power really grows. After all, trash is easier to deal with than smart people." Seeing the boy in front of him shaking hands with him, Mr. Cornelius Fudge breathed a sigh of relief, thinking to himself, "My ministerial position still has a certain deterrent effect. However, my lord minister, I think you made a mistake. What I should get is a second-class mail-in medal. After all, there are research results of potions from you and my beloved dean." Looking at the fat man with a round face in front of him heaved a sigh of relief. Augustus pointed to the 3 bottles of blue potion and a piece of parchment on the ground and said slowly, "Oh, of course, as long as the potion and theoretical results pass the test, I don't think there is any problem." Mr. Cornelius Fudge looked at Augustus' actions and replied hastily, "I don't think I need to prove anything this time." Augustus said slowly, of course, no need. I believe in the level of you and Professor Snape." Mr. Cornelius Fudge replied hastily, finished shaking hands with Augustus, and hurriedly left the scene with the staff of the Ministry of Magic. "Okay, I think you should go to the auditorium for dinner, and now everyone go back to the castle." Seeing Cornelius Fudge leaving in embarrassment, Professor McGonagall breathed a sigh of relief. He was really afraid that, if the Minister of Magic said something wrong, the Ministry of Magic would become a sea of flames tomorrow. Seeing that nothing happened, McGonagall the professor shouted loudly to the students. The students left in a bustling manner, leaving only Hermione, Daphne and Draco standing where they were. Seeing everyone leave, Augustus breathed a sigh of relief, but the pain of magic overdraft also followed, and he felt a little unstable for a while. Seeing that Augustus was unstable, 2 little lollies came over quickly, each holding Augustus's hand. Feeling that his left and right hands were wrapped in unusual softness, Augustus couldn't help but feel his heart flutter, but he felt a strong sense of confrontation on his left and right sides. Augustus could only speak helplessly. "Okay, I'm fine. You don't have to do this. If someone else sees it, it will be misunderstood. Just ask Draco to take me to the infirmary." Draco was taken aback by what Augustus said, and didn't realize it for a while, but he saw Augustus winking at him constantly. Still involuntarily stepped forward, wanting to take over from the two, and helped Augustus to the infirmary. But soon he was locked on by 2 deadly eyes. Seeing the deadly threats from the eyes of Augustus and the left, Draco found that he had entered the same deadlock as the last potions class. "I couldn't help but cursed secretly in my heart. Why am I so cheap? Why can I be in such an embarrassing situation every time?" The so-called familiarity once, Draco also responded quickly, and said to Augustus, "I'm sorry, I suddenly found out that I have some problems with my body, so I will trouble the 2 ladies." After finishing speaking, he didn't care about Augustus' murderous eyes, and ran away without a trace. At this time, Augustus was not in the mood to enjoy hugging left and right. The forced infusion of magic power and the release of super magic caused huge trauma to Augustus both physically and mentally, so Augustus could only fall asleep to the screams of the 2 beautiful girls. "You're awake. An old voice said slowly. Augustus opened his eyes and saw Dumbledore sitting on the edge of the bed, looking at him silently. Augustus looked left and right, but did not find Hermione and Daphne. Seeing Augustus' actions, Dumbledore said with a smile, "I asked the two of them to go back. After all, they are just children who need a full rest. Of course, you don't need to worry. They care about you." When I asked them to go back, they were still very reluctant. It's nice to be young. After finishing speaking, Dumbledore blinked at Augustus. Augustus was not in the mood to make such silly jokes with Dumbledore and said directly, "What's the matter? Why don't you just say it directly? Don't let me guess what you think every time. It's too troublesome." Looking at the straightforward young man in front of him, Dumbledore couldn't help recalling that the person he met in that beautiful summer was also straightforward and dared to think and act. "You are still worried that I will become Voldemort. You don't need to explain. I can read it from your eyes. From the first time we met, I could tell from your eyes that you are afraid of other things besides family affection. In fact, I don't really understand what you are afraid of. In fact, with your strength, you don't have to fear Voldemort at all. You can actually defeat him easily, but you just don't want to. Your heart is full of death and remorse. You are regretting the things you have done before. Why do you regret it? The past is the past, and all we can grasp is the future. Don't you often say that I'm a miracle of magic? Then dear grandfather, just believe again. Once again believe that the miracle of magic will bloom on you. Believe in magic, maybe we can change things that cannot be changed." Augustus said slowly, looking at the silent old man in front of him. Augustus really couldn't feel any blame. He was like a widowed lone wolf, full of loneliness and sadness. Augustus stood up, hugged the old man in front of him, and left the infirmary silently. Looking at the young man going away, Dumbledore could not speak for a long time, and could only respond in silence, but there was a strange gleam in his eyes. Chapter 38 Defense Against the Dark Arts Class. It has been 2 days since the release of the magic, and Augustus has been particularly unhappy these 2 days. One is the old guy Dumbledore. After hearing what he said, he seemed to be a different person. Every time he finished eating, he would ask Augustus to sit by his side, invite Augustus to his damn sweet treats, and listen to him reminisce about his past. In the eyes of others, this was just a special concern of the old grandfather for his grandson, but Augustus always felt that the way Dumbledore looked at him became a little weird. Unable to bear such mental torture, Augustus approached Professor McGonagall and asked to refuse such care on the grounds that talking with his grandfather would affect his studies. But under the threat of Dumbledore saying that he is old and needs care, and as the chief wizard of the Malin-Sir Order, he can interfere with the issuance of the Malin Medal, Augustus could only express a compromise, and the two sides agreed to meet at least once a week. The other is Augustus, who found that his talent in transfiguration was unimaginably poor. Since he released the super magic that day, due to the further activation of the unknown bloodline, Augustus's transfiguration talent dropped from 4 to 2, stupid talent, and his performance in transfiguration was simply a disaster. In the magic experiment where Professor McGonagall asked everyone to turn matches into needles, Augustus's violent magic power directly turned the matches into a giant sword. After Professor McGonagall saw it, he could only say helplessly, "I have never found this kind of performance in the industry for so many years, so it is difficult for me to judge whether your talent for transfiguration is good or bad. At least I succeeded in transfiguration, right? I think I can at least get a passing grade, Professor." Looking at Professor McGonagall's weird expression, Augustus looked at Professor McGonagall with a sincere face and said pitifully with his bright eyes. But Professor McGonagall didn't seem to appreciate it, so he wrote a failing grade on Augustus's class summary and made a side note that he might not have the talent for this subject. What's more, she actually put this class report card on the top, and almost all the Gryffindor and Slytherin students saw it after class. As a result, during dinner that day, almost all the students in the school looked at Augustus and began to point and talk. "Hey, what are you thinking?" A soft and lovely voice pulled Augustus out of his thoughts and back to reality. "It's nothing, Daphne. I just lost my mind a little bit." Augustus waved his hand and said indifferently, "You don't have to care so much. After all, geniuses have flaws." All of us believe that you will be more accomplished than Albus Dumbledore. Daphne looked at Augustus and said seriously, "Thank you, but I'm not sad, but thank you anyway." Seeing the little golden-haired Lolita who was trying to comfort him, Augustus felt very happy, so he stroked the little Lolita's golden hair that was as smooth as silk, and said with a smile, "Ahem, well, two gentlemen and ladies, we have to continue the class, please stop making these intimate actions." Astronomy Professor SYNOPSIS looked at the two, and said with a smile. Hearing the professor's words, Daphne blushed instantly, and Augustus had no choice but to take his hand away from Daphne's head. In fact, he was still a little bit reluctant. After all, the hand feels really good. Okay, let's continue with the class. Let's look at those planets. This one is Jupiter, and that one is Mercury. Professor SYNOPSIS didn't care too much about this little episode, and continued to let the little wizards observe the starry sky, while briefly introducing these planets to them. This astronomy class simply taught everyone how to observe stars, and briefly introduced the names of these planets, so it seemed very boring. Moreover, during this time period, usually everyone should fall asleep early, and everyone seems very sleepy. So after class, the students returned to the dormitory in a bustling manner, and went to rest. Going straight to the second day, there will be the first class of Defense Against the Dark Arts at 2 o'clock this morning, and Slytherin and the Little Wizards of Gryffindor will attend it together. Seeing this curriculum arrangement, Augustus always felt that something was wrong. Why did this school always like to put the two colleges with the worst relationship together for classes? Do you know that the professors of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class change every year, and no one has ever been able to serve continuously? I know, I heard that it is because of the curse of the mysterious person. Really? Then I hope Professor Quirrell will be fine. He wears a big turban every day and smells of garlic all over his body. I really don't know why Dumbledore chose such a person to be the professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. Defense Against the Dark Arts is a subject that little wizards are most looking forward to, no matter in terms of the teaching content or the legendary nature of the position itself. It can be regarded as the top class of Hogwarts. The class has not yet started. Everyone there was a lively discussion. But Augustus understood that Professor Quirrell, who seemed a bit submissive, had Voldemort's remnant soul behind his head. Last time, I taught the Minister of Magic a lesson. Not only did I get an increase in magic power, but I also got 200 magic points. Then, facing the final big boss in this world, my card should not be lower than that of the Minister of Magic. Augustus thought silently in his heart, looking at the vacant teacher's seat. His eyes became more and more ferocious. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Professor Quirrell came to the classroom on time, with that ridiculous big scarf still wrapped around his head, and a strong smell of garlic all over his body, causing the students in front of him to retreat one after another. "Oh Huan, welcome everyone. I'm your Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. My name is Quirinus Quirrell. You can call me Professor Quirrell." Professor Quirrell stood behind the podium, stammering to introduce himself, looking pitiful and bullied. "Now, start the roll call. Please raise your hand for the students who called the name." Professor Quirrell picked up a piece of parchment and started stammering the roll call. When it was called Harry Potter's name, he seemed very excited, and he stepped off the podium and said loudly to Harry Potter, "Oh boy who lived, Harry Potter, our great hero." Professor Quirrell was rarely stuttering anymore. On the contrary, Harry, blushing with embarrassment because of the professor's actions and the gaze of the whole class, couldn't help but lower his head. "Okay, let's continue the roll call. Augustus Dumbledore." After speaking, Professor Quirrell looked at Augustus with a very complicated look in his eyes. Augustus was also staring at Professor Quirrell with an unusual fanaticism in his eyes. After all, a lot of magic points were beckoning to him. Professor Quirrell was a little scared by Augustus, so he had to continue to pretend to be stuttering and slowly finish the name, and then said, "Okay. Our first class will officially begin. Chapter 39 Practical Course." After speaking, Professor Quirrell took out the textbook and began to give lectures according to the script. The boring content coupled with his stuttering speech speed is simply a hypnotic weapon. The students of Slytherin and Gryffindor were even more disappointed. It was really disappointing that the long-awaited defense against the dark arts class turned out to be like this. How could this be? What can we learn from him teaching this way? Dumbledore. Oh no, I mean it's a disaster. Draco was extremely dissatisfied with Professor Quirrell and blurted out a sentence directly, wanting to express his dissatisfaction with Dumbledore's choice of Professor Quirrell. But after looking at Augustus, he quickly changed his words. You don't have to be so nervous, Malfoy. In fact, I have a lot of dissatisfaction with my dear grandfather. Seeing Draco's nervous expression, Augustus said indifferently, do you want to take a look at Professor Quirrell's real skills? Augustus said to Draco. Hearing what Augustus said, Draco breathed a sigh of relief and spoke slowly with great interest. Then what to do? Augustus put his mouth next to Draco's ear and whispered something. Draco nodded again and again, and his eyes shone with a strange brilliance. I don't think this is good. After all, he is a professor, and we should respect him. Hermione looked at the plot of the two boys and said worriedly. Daphne next to her also nodded vigorously. After the last incident, these two little Lolitas became good friends, which Augustus never thought of. Augustus directly ignored the actions of the two of them. After all, women will only affect my casting speed, and the magic point is the real fragrance. Then he immediately winked at Draco, signaling him to start performing. Professor Quirrell, why do you always wear a big scarf around your head, and why do you smell like garlic? A Slytherin student asked curiously. Yes, this is the entrustment arranged by the two. Oh. As you know, I went to Romania during the summer vacation, and met a terrible vampire there who wanted to kill me. It took me a lot of effort to escape, but the vampire is likely to come to me again, so I will prepare some garlic, so that the vampire will not dare to approach me. Professor Quirrell explained with an embarrassed smile. But Professor, this is Hogwarts. This is the safest place in the entire wizarding world. With Principal Dumbledore around, is it possible for vampires to lurk in Hogwarts Castle? As soon as Quirrell's voice fell, another Slytherin student asked immediately. Professor Quirrell was a little confused by the repeated questions. It's just in case. Well, just in case. Professor Quirrell reluctantly found an excuse and continued to respond vaguely. Vampire. I heard that vampires are very dangerous black magic creatures. If you can escape from him, it seems that your level is still very high, Professor. Professor Quirrell had just finished answering the previous question, and another Slytherin student asked immediately. It's not bad. No big deal. Hearing the student's half-joking words, Professor Quirrell could only respond perfunctorily. Then why don't you teach us the real skills? It's too boring to just follow the books. I think you can have an actual combat with one of our students. After all, actual combat is the best teaching. Before Professor Quirrell could finish his answer, Draco said immediately. Seeing that this moment was what he was waiting for, Draco was extremely excited, and now he was going to expose the truth about the professor's incompetence. This. Professor Quirrell's face was flushed, and he couldn't say a complete sentence after talking for a long time. Okay, I think the professor agreed. Everyone left their seats to make room for Professor Quirrell to give us a practical lesson. Seeing Professor Quirrell's embarrassing look, Augustus didn't give him time to react and sent the final blow directly. Hearing what Augustus said, the Slytherin students quickly left their positions and retreated to the two sides under the leadership of Draco. The Gryffindor students were also very excited. After all, they thought this class would be nothing more than that, but unexpectedly, a boring defense against the dark arts class turned into a wonderful practical class. So they also left their seats and retreated to both sides of the classroom. Hermione couldn't help it. She gave Augustus a blank look, pulled Daphne and retreated to both sides of the classroom with the large group. Looking at the movements of the students, Professor Quirrell knew that he could attend today's actual combat class, and he could attend it even if he didn't. Okay, dear Professor, I will suffer a little bit, then I will be your assistant in class today. Augustus said softly, saluted Professor Quirrell gracefully, and then waved the Elder Wand. The tables, chairs, and benches in the classroom immediately flew to the back, and both sides of the classroom, forming an open space in the middle of the classroom. Looking at the smiling handsome boy in front of him, Quirrell's legs were already shaking. In fact, he was already ready to be laughed at by the students today. After all, he still has more important tasks to complete now, and it doesn't matter what Quirrell is going to class. But to fight against the student in front of him, Quirrell said he was helpless. After all, he just saw it through, and didn't lie enough. Kiro, go and fight him. Voldemort's voice suddenly sounded in Professor Quirrell's heart. But, Master, I can't beat him. Facing tremendous pressure, Professor Quirrell had no choice but to tell the truth. So what? You didn't see his provocative gaze. You can bear it. I may not come down. Give me the control of the body. I will teach this kid a lesson myself. Voldemort said that, although he already knew Augustus's magical talent and saw the super magic he used, it was just a teaching practice, and it was impossible for him to use that terrifying large-scale magic. With his many years of dueling experience, Voldemort thought that he was still very sure of defeating the little bastard in front of him. Moreover, this little bastard is still surnamed Dumbledore. He defeated him by himself, and he can be considered as defeated Dumbledore by rounding up, so he must fight him. Voldemort thought angrily. But Master, are you sure you can beat him? Professor Quirrell said slowly with some unconfidence. Hearing Quirrell's words, Voldemort felt that he was hallucinating, and then said angrily, "What are you talking about? You think the greatest Dark Lord in the entire wizarding world can't beat a child like this? How dare you doubt your master? Hurry up and give me your body. Don't let me say it again." Hearing Voldemort's hysterical roar, Professor Quirrell was so frightened that he almost knelt down on the spot, and he could only say with a wry smile in his heart, "Yes, yes, as you wish, great master." Professor Quirrell did not dare to disobey Voldemort's order, and gave him control of his body. Chapter 40 Avada Kedavra vs Avada Kedavra. When Voldemort gained the control of Professor Quirrell, he moved his body, and felt a burst of relief. Looking at this weak body, he couldn't help sighing in his heart. What a waste. Okay, since you want to watch the actual combat teaching, of course, I will satisfy you. As Professor Quirrell said, he walked from behind the podium to the center of the open space in the classroom. Augustus Dumbledore is an outstanding genius at Hogwarts, but I will show you that there is still a certain gap between you and the professor. Professor Quirrell pointed to Augustus and said slowly. Seeing Professor Quirrell's aura change drastically, Augustus knew that the person who now controls this body has become Voldemort. Of course, I always thought that you must have real skills, Professor. Augustus flattered him, walked forward silently, and looked at Professor Quirrell in front of him, or it should be Voldemort. Professor Quirrell's performance was completely different from that of Trash Dim Sum just now, and he said calmly, "Then do you know what the ritual of a duel is like? This requires the professor to teach you." Augustus continued to flatter the Tau. "Of course, we need to hold the one to the forehead, then bow to the opponent in respect, and then the two sides go to the opposite ends of the field to start the duel," Professor Quirrell said elegantly. Augustus nodded when he heard the words. Seeing Augustus' actions, Professor Quirrell seemed very happy. How could a child who didn't even understand duel etiquette defeat him with conventional magic? Very well, now that you have understood the etiquette of duels, let's get started, Professor Quirrell said impatiently. When Voldemort first started facing this talented young man who could use super level magic, he actually felt a little helpless. After all, he only had a remnant soul left, and he had lost most of his strength. But looking at Augustus' ignorance, Voldemort regained his confidence. After all, being strong in combat and dueling are two different things, and defeating Dumbledore is today. Augustus stepped forward, stood in front of Professor Quirrell, then raised the wand in his hand to his forehead, and finally bowed slightly to Professor Quirrell. Voldemort also raised Quirrell's wand, and bowed gracefully and confidently to Augustus. After the ceremony was over, the two sides turned their backs to each other, and walked towards the two ends of the classroom. The little wizards in the classroom watched intently. After all, for most of them, this was the first time they saw a real wizard duel. Expelliarmus disarms. Voldemort took the lead, and the wand in his hand shot out a red light. This was the disarming charm, a very practical spell. After all, for ordinary wizards, losing their wand would basically lose their fighting power. Protego armor body protection. Seeing Voldemort's movements, Augustus expressed no panic, waved his Elder Wand, and released a powerful lion armor curse around him. Voldemort on the opposite side was slightly startled. He wasn't surprised that Augustus could cast the iron armor curse. He was surprised that Augustus didn't dodge, but stood there straight. One must know that he used the disarming curse. Even ordinary auras would fly backwards after being hit. The ordinary iron armor curse is very difficult to defend against. When the red curse hit Augustus's transparent armor, not only did it fail to penetrate the defense, but bounced back the disarming curse. Seeing the disarming curse flying towards him, Voldemort immediately dodged to the side, dodging the disarming curse. After all, in the wizarding world, the best way to deal with spells is not to let the spells hit you. Even if it is a killing spell, as long as it does not hit the target, it will have no effect. Professor, don't be too polite. Use your strongest magic. That kind of spell is really useless, Augustus said sarcastically. Voldemort, who was made ashamed by his own spell, heard Augustus's ridicule, and was furious for a while, and a large number of spells poured towards Augustus. Colloportus imprison quickly. Stupefy passed out. Reducto to pieces. Voldemort went crazy, and fired the spell that he thought was less dangerous at Augustus, like a bombardment. However, from the colorful spell, it hit Augustus's transparent armor, and it was all bounced back. Voldemort had no choice but to cast the spell, while avoiding his own spell that was bounced back, and had to roll around in the classroom, looking very embarrassed. Seeing Professor Quirrell rolling on the ground in front of them, the little wizards were stunned. They never thought that the long-awaited wizard duel would be like this. So one by one whispered to each other, and pointed to Professor Quirrell, who had been rolling on the ground, and started talking. It seems that I still can't attract the professor's attention. Have you been unwilling to use your real skills? Looking at the embarrassed Voldemort, Augustus continued to taunt. That's right. Today is to make Voldemort lose not only his life, but also his reputation. After all, the worse you lose, the more benefits I will have, Augustus thought viciously. Hearing the discussions of the little wizards and Augustus' taunts, Voldemort felt his lungs were about to explode, and his sanity was swallowed up by anger. He picked up his wand, and shouted at Augustus, Avada Kedavra, Avada Kedavra. Looking at the green light flying over, Augustus smiled. Yes, that's what it looks like. What kind of Dark Lord is a Dark Lord who doesn't use the killing curse? Augustus also picked up his Elder Wand, and shouted at the flying spell, Avada Kedavra, Avada Kedavra. Two strands of green light collided together, powerful magic collided wantonly, and sparks flew everywhere for a while. Looking at the two people who cast the death curse on the stage, the little wizards were too shocked to speak, and the pure-blooded little wizards even pulled their classmates back to the back of the classroom. Seeing Augustus use the killing curse, Voldemort felt that the three views had been broken. When would a first-year little wizard be able to use the killing curse? At the same time, it also increased the output of magic power. After all, if he lost this confrontation, he might die again. Losing to a child twice was unacceptable to the proud Lord Dark Lord. Seeing that Voldemort increased his magic power output, Augustus sneered. If Voldemort was in his prime, Augustus would not dare to confront him head-on, but he is using Quirrell's body now. As for that waste snack, he is also worthy of confronting himself head-on. Do you have that strength? Then Augustus increased the output of magic power, and the green magic light suddenly changed from the size of a little finger to the size of an arm. As Augustus increased the output of magic power, the joint point of the curse was pushed towards Voldemort step by step. There was a trace of cold sweat on Voldemort's face, and he cursed inwardly. This is a first-year freshman. This TMD is 11 years old. Where did Dumbledore find such a little monster? Before he finished speaking, Voldemort couldn't hold on any longer, and his hand holding the wand slightly shook, and Augustus's thick killing curse immediately defeated Voldemort's spell. A thick green light flew towards Voldemort. Chapter 41. Seeing the huge green light attacking him, Voldemort's not so good memories once flooded his mind. Could it be that the great Dark Lord was once again defeated by a child? No, absolutely not, Voldemort thought viciously, and then, in a hurry, he used the fuchsia charm on himself, and was immediately hung from the ceiling with his feet upside down. The deadly killer curse light grazed Professor Quirrell's scalp, shattered the windows of the classroom, flew into the air of the castle, and then exploded violently. There was a loud bang, like a thunderbolt in the clear sky, and the entire Hogwarts castle seemed to shake violently. The explosion created a huge green fireball in the air, sending out a powerful shock wave that shattered the glass in the entire defense against the dark arts classroom. What? Seeing the shards of glass attacking them, the little wizard screamed and started running around in panic. "Don't worry, nothing will happen," Augustus said confidently, and waved the elder wand in his hand. A light golden translucent barrier appeared in front of the little wizards, helping them to stop the incoming glass shards and other sundries. Looking at the magic barrier in front of them, the little wizard slowly breathed a sigh of relief, but there are still many people who want to leave the classroom. After all, the battle between the two in front of them is too dangerous. As a result, most of the Gryffindor students and a small number of Slytherin students left the classroom in a hurry. Some people thought the situation was serious and began to seek help from other professors. At the same time, the students of other grades in Hogwarts were also startled by the sudden violent explosion outside the window. "Oh my god, it's terrible. Look at that horrible fireball. There will be no enemies coming to invade Hogwarts." The little wizards rioted and started making noise. "Everyone be quiet. Hogwarts Castle is the safest place in the entire wizarding world. There will be no danger here. Now, all of you sit in your seats for me. You are not allowed to run around in the classroom, let alone go out. If I find out, you don't want to get any good grades this year." Professor McGonagall shouted loudly, while scanning everyone with his serious and cold eyes. Everyone in the classroom immediately began to sit upright, showing the appearance of a good student. After all, Professor McGonagall is still very intimidating. Leaving the Transfiguration classroom, Professor McGonagall quickly met Professor Flitwick, the Professor of Charms, Snape, the Professor of Potions, and even Dumbledore, who was fishing in the principal's office, came in a hurry. "It's definitely not an ordinary spell. I think you've all noticed the color of the spell that flew out. Someone used Avada Kedavra in the school," Professor McGonagall said seriously. "Then do you know who cast the spell?" Professor Flitwick said. "I'm not 100% sure, Professor Flitwick, but the visual inspection should come from the defense against the dark arts classroom," Professor McGonagall replied. "Then let's go and see what happened," Professor Flitwick said nervously. After all, someone used the killing curse in Hogwarts Castle. After hearing what Professor McGonagall said, Dumbledore thought about it and asked Professor McGonagall, "What year and which house is defense against the dark arts class today?" "Freshman, Gryffindor and Slytherin." Hearing Dumbledore's thoughtless question, Professor McGonagall still answered seriously. Hearing Professor McGonagall's answer, Dumbledore felt his eyes go dark, and the familiar feeling of heart attack returned. Professor McGonagall also discovered the problem at this time, and hurriedly called everyone to the defense against the dark arts classroom. After all, if the little ancestor is allowed to continue playing, it may not be the death curse that flies out of the window, but the terrifying fiend-fired dragon. Look back to my defense against the dark arts classroom. The golden bell has landed. Voldemort cast a spell on himself, the counter curse of fuchsia. Clear water is like a spring, frozen thousands of miles. Augustus saw the opportunity and cast her spells below Voldemort. In an instant, the ground turned into a frozen slide, which was very smooth and glistened in the sunlight. Thump. Voldemort stepped on the ice as soon as the Admiralty clock landed and was caught off guard and fell to the sky with his feet. Seeing Voldemort's miserable state, Augustus touched his face inadvertently, thinking of Voldemort's nostrilless face making intimate contact with the ground. That ugly face, which was already round and with blurred features, was about to be smashed into a big persimmon. Augustus smiled, and hearing the voice from the door, decided to give Voldemort the final blow. Wingardium Leviosa. Using the levitation charm, Augustus turned Voldemort one way in the air, then exerted a forward thrust behind Voldemort, and Voldemort immediately slid down the icy slide towards the door. "What the hell are you doing? How can you use such terrible magic in school?" Professor McGonagall appeared at the classroom door and yelled loudly. Before the words fell, Professor McGonagall saw an unknown object attacking him quickly. Snape next to him was very straightforward, waved his wand, and flew a table in front of Professor McGonagall. Boom. Voldemort's head hit the table with a dull sound, and then he got up with difficulty, wanting to explain to the professors. Relatio les invent. Seeing that Voldemort had got up, Augustus immediately pointed his wand at Voldemort's ass and cast a small spell. Professor McGonagall saw that Quirrell had stood up and asked loudly, "How can you use the killing curse at Hogwarts? You are seriously violating Hogwarts regulations." On the way here, Professor McGonagall has seen many first-year students who ran out of the classroom and got the general truth from their mouths. She never expected that a professor would use the death curse on a student, so she questioned Professor Quirrell loudly. And Voldemort was hit by Augustus's curse and suddenly felt that he could not control the muscles of his ass, as if something was pouring out. Voldemort clamped his hips desperately, covered his buttocks with his hands, and said loudly to Professor McGonagall and everyone, Okay, the actual combat class is over, and the duel is over. Let me get out of here quickly." Professor McGonagall looked at the distorted Professor Quirrell in front of him, still stood in front of him relentlessly, and continued to question him about the death curse. "I'll explain. Please let me out," Voldemort said with tears in his eyes. However, Professor McGonagall is still relentless, and he has the momentum that you don't want to leave this classroom without explaining clearly today. After a few minutes of stalemate, Voldemort felt something come out of his ass. "It's over." Voldemort cursed inwardly, and then a strange liquid and gas came out of Professor Quirrell's body. Watching the unspeakable things gushing out, Voldemort fell directly to the ground, closed his eyes, and did not listen to Professor Quirrell's objection in his mind, and directly returned control of his body to him. "After all, it has nothing to do with me, Voldemort, that you Quirrell lose face. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 40 to the new defense against the dark arts professor. Looking at Professor Quirrell, who fell into the indescribable mixture of solid and liquid, both Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick were stunned. Even Professor Snape, who had a straight face every day, showed his paralyzed face. A trace of fluctuation. "Go away, it stinks in here. Wait for me, I'm almost out of strength." And the little wizards who stayed in the classroom were even more suffocated by the smell. The Slytherin students who witnessed this tragedy in the front row really vomited one by one. Both Hermione and Daphne held their noses, then gave Augustus a hard look, and then sneaked out through the back door of the classroom. The whole classroom seemed to have been bombed with poison gas, and the stench was incomparable even to big dung eggs. In fact, not only the students and professors in the classroom, but even the little wizards in the corridor were not spared. Those people rushed to see the students of other grades who were busy. This Professor Quirrell was very fuzzy. "Okay, let's all leave and go back to where we should be, and the senior students will take some unconscious students to Mrs. Panglay's place." Seeing a group of senior students watching the excitement around the classroom door, some of them wanted to go out through the main entrance, but were blocked at the door. As a last resort, the students who saw the tragic situation of Professor Quirrell fainted directly. Professor McGonagall shouted loudly, "Minerva, let me take a look," Dumbledore said with a distorted face. Professor McGonagall stepped aside so that Dumbledore could see it in more detail. Dumbledore looked at Professor Quirrell, who was lying on the ground, whose life and death were unknown, and the pool of indescribable solid liquid mixture, and a strange expression appeared on his perennially calm face. "Clean and new." Whirlwind clean. Dumbledore took out the Elder Wand and cast 2 cleansing spells, which made Professor Quirrell from being indistinguishable from human to animal to his current human form. "Send Professor Quirrell to the school hospital first, and everyone should leave. Don't crowd here," Dumbledore said. However, everyone present was indifferent, and looked at each other one after another. After all, the tragic situation just witnessed, even with magic, was unacceptable. After all, who can guarantee that there will be no accidents in the middle? Seeing that everyone was indifferent, Dumbledore sighed and had to use his ace toolman. "Severus, you should send Professor Quirrell to the school hospital. Minerva, you and Professor Flitwick will take those little wizards back to their respective colleges." As soon as Dumbledore finished speaking, Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick immediately left the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom in a stride, looking as if they were more than 20 years younger. Professor Snape looked at the old bee in front of him in shock. The lower limit of this old bee once again refreshed his 3 views. I think I can help you come up with an idea. You can create a pulley cart under Professor Quirrell, and use other items to turn it into a rope, so that you can pull him away directly, Augustus said with an innocent face, as if he was talking about something indifferent. When Professor Snape heard this, his eyes lit up. He looked at Professor Quirrell, who was lying on the ground in disgust, and waved his wand. The icy slide under Professor Quirrell's body was turned into a 4-wheeled scooter, and several cable ties were conjured up to firmly fix Professor Quirrell on the scooter. Finally, Professor Snape put the chair turned into a rope, tightly wrapped around Professor Quirrell's neck, ready to drag this annoying person to the infirmary like a dead dog. Wait, Dean, I think we have one more thing to deal with, Augustus said. Dumbledore's eyelids twitched wildly when he saw Snape's actions, but when he heard Augustus' words suddenly, he felt his heart tighten again. Seeing the complicated expression on Dumbledore's face, Augustus smiled and then spoke slowly. Don't worry, grandfather, it's not about anything else, it's just about the professorship of Defense Against the Dark Arts. Hearing this, Dumbledore was obviously relieved, and Professor Snape's eyes lit up. Seeing the changes in the expressions on the faces of the two, Augustus shrugged and continued. After all this terrible accident happened, I think Professor Quirrell may not be able to continue to perform his duties as a professor for a long time. I think we need a new professor. Seeing that Augustus had completely removed himself from the accident, Dumbledore's eyelids twitched wildly, and he thought to himself, what's the matter with this brat? Why didn't he inherit any of his own advantages, but copied that guy's character exactly? Could it be that there is something hidden in it that I don't know about? Dumbledore was thinking wildly in his heart. In the past 100 years, his mentality has never fluctuated as frequently as in this short period of more than a month. Looking at the handsome boy in front of him, Dumbledore thought to himself, if he didn't know the origin of this little bastard, he really suspected that he might have been greened by that guy. Dumbledore calmed down and said to Augustus, then which professor do you think is qualified for this position? As soon as Dumbledore finished speaking, Augustus felt a strong attention. Snape was staring at Augustus with his own eyes, looking at his dean, who would not recommend it to me. I will pour potions into your breakfast tomorrow. Augustus quietly gestured with an okay gesture. After all, I originally planned to recommend Professor Snape. Defense Against the Dark Arts is an important subject. How can I give it to a trash to teach? This Hogwarts is my basic set. What is the use of teaching a bunch of trash? I think this position requires an honest and reliable professor who is serious about teaching, easygoing, and gentle. What do you think of my dean, Professor Snape? Augustus looked at Dumbledore and said sincerely. Hearing Augustus's words, Dumbledore's face began to twitch. His gentle personality, what does this have to do with Snape? But he still pretended to be serious and said, I don't deny Severus' outstanding ability, but he is already a professor of potions, and it is too hard for him to teach 2 courses. Hearing Dumbledore's high-sounding words, Augustus said that Jiang was still old and hot, and he looked like he was talking nonsense without drafting a draft. He really deserved to be the headmaster of Hogwarts. Professor Snape's reaction was even more direct. He directly tightened the rope around Professor Quirrell's neck with magic power and strangled Professor Quirrell, who could only pretend to be unconscious, until his face flushed. Then he stared at Dumbledore. There was a feeling that, if you don't choose me as a professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts, I will let you lose a professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts now. Okay, I'll trouble you then, Severus. Looking at the two who had been staring at him, and Professor Quirrell who was about to die, Dumbledore could only helplessly agree. Hearing his words, Snape loosened the rope that was strangling Professor Quirrell's neck, and gently dragged Professor Quirrell to the infirmary, as gently as walking his deerhound. Chapter 43 Dress Up, Harry. A whole week has passed since the factual incident of Professor Quirrell. In the Hogwarts auditorium, everyone was discussing what happened recently while eating lunch. It's really unfortunate that Snape will be the professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. It's a disaster. On the Gryffindor long table, Ron was biting a chicken leg and speaking inarticulately. Ron, don't talk while eating, and you should call him a professor. This is basic courtesy. If you don't want to be embarrassed by Professor Snape, I suggest you go to the library to read more books, or go to participate in a study session organized by Augustus. Hermione looked at Ron and said with disgust. Hearing this, Ron curled his lips, not arguing with Hermione. Anyway, he can't say no to her every time. She is really not cute at all, or Daphne is cuter. Thinking of Ron sneaking a glance at Daphne next to Hermione, Hermione gave him a hard look when she saw it, then took Daphne's little hand and led her to the Slytherin long table. Really, how can a Gryffindor hang out with Slytherin people every day? Seeing Hermione's actions, Ron said dissatisfied. But Daphne and Augustus belong to Slytherin too. Hearing his friend's sour tone, Harry said helplessly, "Okay, let's not talk about this. How do you feel? I think Professor Snape is very concerned about you." Hearing Harry's complaints, Ron said gloatingly. Hearing that, Harry was a little silent, thinking back to what Professor Snape had done to him this week. He also felt bitter. Since Professor Snape met Lila's soul in a dream, Snape promised to protect Harry under Lila's begging, and promised to teach Harry his own potion skills, and able to protect itself from magic. You are Harry's nightmare. For a week, he hardly had any spare time. He was either learning to brew potions with Professor Snape, or learning defensive magic, and then cooperated with Professor Snape. With Zangwanians and changing stinky face, and that broken mouth that sprayed poison at the slightest disagreement, Harry felt that this week was nothing short of a nightmare. But Harry can really feel that his abilities are becoming stronger, whether it is potions or spells. So Harry's feelings towards Professor Snape have become very complicated, and he really doesn't know whether to hate him. He still loves him. Okay, don't think about it anymore. After all, you have indeed improved. Seeing Harry's silence, Ron could only comfort him. Oh, it's okay. Thank you, Ron. By the way, what class is this afternoon? Harry said with a smile. It should be Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Hey, I'm going to see that old bat again, Ron said with a painful face. The Defense Against the Dark Arts class meant that I would have to learn magic with Professor Snape again tonight. No, this won't work. If I continue like this, I will be driven crazy. Harry thought silently. In fact, Harry had asked Professor Snape for a leave of absence, the reason being that he was going to do Quidditch training. But it seems that this reason is not a good reason, Professor Snape said with twitching cheeks when he heard it. Quidditch is a very stupid sport. I think Mr. Potter should learn how to protect himself. You know that the wizarding world is not safe. After finishing speaking, Professor Snape flamboyantly ignored Harry's request for leave and doubled the number of potions Harry needed to process at night. Thinking of the tragedy that day, Harry strengthened his determination. He must find a way today, and this can't go on anymore. Harry expressed that he couldn't accept Professor Snape's heavy love. Who are you looking for? Harry couldn't help but cast his eyes on the long table of Slytherin. The specific rules will be handled according to what was said last time. I think Mr. Lucius can handle the problems that still exist. There are also those who joined the study session. You have to take charge of the inspection and divide them into levels according to their level. If they make progress, they need to be rewarded. If they don't want to work hard, they will be expelled from the study session. Augustus was speaking, and Draco was holding a notebook, writing down everything Augustus said. It has to be said that Draco is indeed an excellent organizer. Everything that Augustus entrusted to him is in perfect order. Now Slytherin can be regarded as a slightly organized whole. Is there anything else to explain, Chief? Draco said respectfully. No more. That's all for now. Augustus nodded and said silently. Hearing that, Draco closed his notebook, then took out a beautiful envelope from his body, handed it to Augustus, and said, "My father gave it to me. Let me pass it on to you." Augustus took the envelope and opened it directly. Inside, there were exquisite cursive characters written with a quill pen, and the language was elegant and elegant. The general meaning was to invite Augustus to come to his manor for a Christmas gathering. It seems that the pureblood family represented by Lucius wants to get in touch with him, and it's not bad that he also wanted to get in touch with them. thinking of Augustus handing the letter back to Draco directly. Draco took it and looked at it immediately and then looked at Augustus expectantly. Augustus nodded and then said, "I accept Mr. Lucius' invitation, but his words are too elegant. I don't have such a high standard. Please help me reply to your father." Hearing that, Draco seemed very happy. He quickly agreed and once again solemnly extended an invitation to Augustus in his own name and then happily went back to the dormitory to write a reply. "Are you free now, Mr. Augustus?" Seeing that Augustus had finally handed over the work, Harry asked angrily. "Oh, it's Harry. Don't call me Mr. Just call me by my first name. I told you that on the train. We are friends," Augustus replied with a smile. Hearing this, Harry nodded, looking very happy. Unexpectedly, Augustus still remembered what happened at that time. He was a friend to us, and asking a friend for help is not a shameful thing. So Harry continued. "It's like this. You also know that Professor Snape has been helping me with my lessons recently. I'm really tired. Is there any way you can ask Professor Snape to give me a few days off?" After listening to Harry's grievances, Augustus nodded sympathetically, although he could probably guess that it wasn't because of Lily in the room that he wanted to protect Harry, but it was Professor Snape's love. It's not something ordinary people can afford. Looking at the poor Harry in front of him, Augustus thought for a while and then said seriously, "It's an extraordinary time now. If you want Professor Snape to give you a vacation, there is only one way. Ladies' clothes, Harry." Chapter 44 Harry, no, ITN-039, S. Harry, what? Hearing what Augustus said, Harry, Hermione, and Daphne exclaimed at the same time. Even Ron, who was hiding behind Harry, opened his mouth wide in disbelief. "Women's clothing, Augustus, what a way," Harry said bitterly. Seeing Harry's resentful expression, Augustus said with a smile and waved his hands. "Don't doubt that you heard correctly, Harry. The biggest reason why Professor Snape treated you like that is because you are a man. As long as you dress up as a girl, Professor Snape promises not to make things difficult for you." "Really?" Hearing Augustus's swearing words, Harry was slightly shaken. "Don't listen to his Harry. You just have to study hard. Professor Snape will let you go." Seeing the smile on Augustus' face, Hermione felt something was wrong and said quickly, "Oh yes, Professor Snape is a well-known potion master and black magic master in the magic world. If you want to impress him with your grades, maybe these 7 school years are not enough for you," Augustus said with a smile. "And Harry, even if Professor Snape doesn't let you ask for leave after you become a girl, at least he won't be dealing with those disgusting potion ingredients there after you become a girl," Augustus continued to say seductively. After listening to what Augustus said, weighing the pros and cons in his mind, Harry made up his mind. After all, he couldn't last even a day in 7 years. "Okay, I agree, but what should I do?" Harry said seriously. "Okay, now that you've agreed, let's go to Slytherin, and I'll help you, Harry." Seeing that Harry finally agreed, Augustus looked very excited, said quickly, and led everyone to the Slytherin common room. Coming to the Slytherin common room, Augustus took out his magic suitcase and then climbed into the suitcase under the surprised eyes of everyone. "Come down," Augustus yelled at the bottom of the suitcase, and everyone came back to their senses and slowly climbed up the stairs into the suitcase. "Wow, this is truly spectacular." Looking at the entire workshop inside the suitcase, everyone couldn't help but exclaim. "Okay, hurry up. Class is about to start. We have to get this matter done quickly." As Augustus said, he led everyone to the dressing room in the workshop. Looking at the professional dressing room with complete equipment and tools, everyone cast strange eyes on Augustus. "What kind of eyes do you guys have? This is what I used to cover up my true face when I was in the United States. I don't have any strange hobbies." After finishing speaking, Augustus came to Hermione and Daphne and hammered the heads of the Tulalitus with his own hands. Then he said to Harry, "Don't be dumb and sit on the chair quickly." When Harry heard this, he immediately ran to the chair in the center of the dressing room and sat down. Augustus immediately walked towards Harry with a pile of cosmetics and then worked intensely on Harry's face. After 10 minutes, this may not meet Professor Snape's requirements. It's okay, at least it can be seen that Harry is a human being. Human, From what angle do you see it? I can't see that this appearance is a human being. After feeling that there was no movement on his face, Harry slowly opened his eyes and saw the three of Hermione discussing around him and Augustus squatting in the corner alone. Hearing what Hermione and the others said, Harry felt something was wrong and quickly turned his head to look in the mirror. As a result, Harry almost jumped up from the stool in fright at his own reflection in the mirror. The whole face was painted with a thick layer of pale foundation by Augustus, while black eyeshadow was painted around the eyes, coupled with the huge red rouge circles on both sides of the cheeks, and the death bar beyond the lips pink lipstick. Apart from being able to vaguely tell that this is a human being from the outline, other aspects are simply hard to describe. Okay, men are still not very good at doing these things. Let's come. Hermione, can you help me? Seeing Harry's sad expression, Daphne said with some unbearable heart. Ah, me. Hearing Daphne's words, Hermione seemed a little at a loss. Her two little hands were twitching together frantically, and she said helplessly, maybe I can't help you, Daphne. I don't know how to make up. After speaking, seeing the surprised expressions of the three men present, Hermione blushed with shame, lowered her head, and looked at her toes, thinking helplessly. Since I was sensible, I only like to do one thing, which is reading. When girls of the same age are discussing how to make themselves more beautiful, Hermione scoffs at this, but she did not expect to be in such an embarrassing situation today. It's okay, Hermione, that's just right. You can stay by my side, and I can teach you. Looking at the embarrassed Hermione, Daphne continued to speak softly. Daphne, you are my angel. Hearing Daphne's words, Hermione hugged Daphne excitedly, said in a slightly crying tone, then glared at Augustus who wanted to laugh at her just now, and said angrily, it's not like some people who know how to tease classmates and professors every day, and never care about what other people think. It's really annoying. After finishing speaking, Hermione let go of Daphne, drove Augustus and Ron out of the dressing room, and claimed that this was a matter between the ladies, and it was too impolite for the men to watch. Augustus and Ron stayed outside the door of the dressing room, and heard Hermione's exclamation, Daphne's gentle explanation, and of course Harry's shy words from inside. Augustus didn't care. He stood there leaning against the wall with his arms folded, but Ron put his ear to the door, trying to hear more news. After about 10 minutes, Ron suddenly removed his ear from the door, which opened and Hermione and Daphne came out of the dressing room. Where's Harry? Ron looked at the two of them and said suspiciously. Okay, Harry, don't be shy, and come out quickly. Daphne said softly, but there was still no movement. Hermione couldn't wait any longer, and went back to the dressing room. After a while, Harry was forcibly pushed out of the dressing room by Hermione. Don't be like this, Hermione, I'll just come out. As Harry said, he slowly walked out of the dressing room, and stood in front of everyone, looking at the beautiful girl, teenager, in front of them. Both Augustus and Ron opened their mouths wide with expressions of disbelief. Long red hair, fair skin, exquisite facial features and slender eyelashes, and a touch of eyeshadow next to the eyes make those green eyes even more charming. Coupled with a touch of lipstick, they are simply youthful and beautiful avatar. Well, it's not bad. It took us some effort. Daphne said proudly. Of course, it's beautiful. It's really cute. At least I think it's much cuter than Hermione. Looking at the beautiful and moving brother in front of him, he replied without thinking. Chapter 45 Gryffindor, plus 20 points. Really, is it really pretty? Hearing his friend's undisguised admiration and that naked expression, Harry said softly, looking a little at a loss. Looking at the nervous and shy Harry in front of him, Ron felt that his heart was going to melt, and he nodded frantically in approval. Let's go, Daphne. We don't want to stay with this kind of person. We are not polite at all, Hermione said angrily. Seeing the piggy look on Ron's face and the annoying words, Hermione angrily took Daphne's hand and walked out of the box. Seeing the two ladies leave angrily and looking back, Ron still looked at his good brother with a foolish face. Augustus sighed and had to forcefully lead the two out of the box. When everyone came to the Slytherin common room, they saw Draco leading the first year Slytherin students, waiting in line for something. Draco was slightly surprised when he saw Augustus crawling out of the box, but he didn't think much about it. He greeted Daphne and Hermione politely, and then walked over like Augustus. Chief, so you go to the box. I'm still looking for you in the common room. The staff has been assembled. Let's go. Draco said. Hearing this, Augustus nodded and hurriedly greeted the two people who were still dawdling in the box. Hurry up, or we'll be late. As soon as the voice fell, Ron slowly climbed out of the box. Seeing Ron, Draco's face darkened immediately. If Hermione and Daphne were closer to Augustus and Draco didn't dare to offend, then Harry Potter has the reputation of being the savior. Draco didn't want to offend. But the red-haired Weasley in front of him can be said to be one of the few people Draco hated the most at Hogwarts. This is not Mr. Weasley. What are you doing in our Slytherin common room? If you don't eat in the auditorium, could it be that you want to join the study session? I remember someone said last time that he could easily join. You only scored 10 points for all the questions. Maybe your talent in learning is not as high as your talent in eating. It was not easy for Draco to catch the opportunity, so he played traditional arts and started spraying venom crazily. Ron, who was ridiculed by Draco crazily, was flushed with anger, but it was difficult to refute. After all, most of what Draco said was true. Okay Draco, stop mocking Ron. Let's go to class. Harry's voice came from behind Ron. Hearing this familiar voice, Draco hurriedly looked behind Ron, ready to scold Harry and Ron together. But looking around, there was a pretty girl with long red hair standing there, with nervousness and shyness in her eyes. Seeing Draco looking over, she quickly lowered her head. Looking at the pure girl in front of him, Draco felt his heart was touched, and an indescribable feeling came to his heart. Well, even this beautiful lady is willing to intercede for this idiot, so I forgive this rude guy. Draco said silently, pretending to be a gentleman, and couldn't help but glance at Harry after finishing speaking. Hearing Draco's words, Harry blushed even more, so he had to bury his head lower, not to look at the expressions of everyone. Daphne wanted to go over and explain, but was held back by Augustus, who said badly, "Alright Daphne, don't destroy other people's illusions. Let's go to class." After speaking, without giving Daphne a chance to explain, she directly greeted everyone and walked to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Draco deliberately stayed in the last row of the line and kept chatting with Harry, pretending to be a gentleman. The last one in the line was Ron, who was looking at the two people in front of him with his eyes resentful. It was only when Draco came to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom that he was reluctant to part with Harry. After all, Gryffindor and Slytherin could not be at the same table. Ron took advantage of this opportunity and sat next to Harry again. Harry blushed and regretted it. He now felt that his brother and Draco were more terrifying than Professor Snape. With a bang, the door was kicked open, and Professor Snape, wearing a black robe with silver piping, walked into the classroom in a hurry. His current image is completely different from before, probably due to the use of a lot of special potions. His hair has grown back, but it is completely different from the previous greasy image. Well manicured long hair, paired with a clearly treated face, and a gorgeous black robe with silver piping, he has changed from a greasy pervert to a handsome middle-aged man. Looking at the image of Professor Snape, Augustus couldn't help sighing. The power of love is truly terrifying. Turn your books to page 45. Snape came to the podium, opened the book, and said coldly without looking up, "We are now starting to learn what black magic is, and several spells commonly used to defend against black magic. In my class, books are only auxiliary, and everything is based on practicality and usefulness." Professor Snape wrote down a few common spells on the blackboard, and then continued to speak coldly. "Okay, I believe that some people should know about these common spells in advance, so let him explain them to everyone. Okay, Mr. Potter, let's talk about it." After writing the spell, Professor Snape turned around, continued to look at his textbook, and continued without looking up. Because of the women's clothing, Harry's mind is in a mess. Suddenly, Professor Snape called his name, and his mind went blank. He could only stand up resentfully, and then turned his gaze to Augustus. Augustus looked at Harry, then wrote a few words on a piece of paper, and held it up in front of Harry. "Honest, trust me, you'll get points for answering Professor Snape honestly." Looking at the words written by Augustus on the paper, Harry took a deep breath and said honestly, "Sorry sir, I may have forgotten." Hearing that Snape raised his head suddenly, his heart was filled with anger. He taught him so hard, but he couldn't answer such a simple question. It seemed that he was too gentle. thinking of Snape already brewing all kinds of ugly words in his heart, but seeing Harry's appearance, Snape suddenly felt that he couldn't say a word. The person in front of him, with long red hair, paired with green eyes, and Gryffindor school uniform, Professor Snape seemed to have a feeling of another world. The resemblance was so similar. Looking at the boy, in front of him, Snape was silent on the podium for a long time, and finally had to speak in an extremely awkward tone. Well, it's normal not to know, and 20 points to Gryffindor for your honesty. Chapter 46 A New Plan. The entire defense against the dark arts classroom was suddenly silent, and all the little wizards stopped what they were doing, and focused their eyes on the podium. They all wondered if there was something wrong with their ears, and Professor Snape actually gave Gryffindor 20 points. You must know that for some unspeakable reasons, Professor Snape did not target Harry as madly as before, but his actions against Gryffindor did not show any restraint. For example, in potions class this week, Neville Longbottom was deducted 10 points from Gryffindor by Professor Snape because he stirred the cauldron with his left hand. The little snakes in Slytherin opened their mouths wide in shock. They knew best how eccentric the dean of their own college was, but why did the dean go to another college now? And it's Slytherin's feud, Gryffindor. Doesn't Professor Snape hate Gryffindor the most? Could it be that this professor is pretending? Okay, Mr. Potter, please sit down, and then we will start class. Professor Snape didn't care what other people thought, and just ignored everyone's eyes. At this time, Harry was even more flattered. He never expected that Professor Snape's attitude would change so much. Could it be that, as Augustus said, his biggest mistake was because he was a boy? It's really unbelievable that Professor Snape actually gave you extra points. Ron looked at his brother who was sitting down and said with a look of disbelief. Harry didn't speak, but was thinking about how to ask Professor Snape for leave tonight. Professor Snape continued to do his own style of class, mocking the Gryffindor students from time to time. After explaining the theoretical knowledge, Professor Snape asked the students to start practicing the spells he taught in pairs. The students quickly formed their own team. Ron wanted to form a team with Harry without any surprise. Seeing that Harry was still in a daze, he pushed Harry with his hands, trying to wake him up. This movement was quickly caught by Professor Snape. He looked at Harry's current appearance, and then at Ron, especially that head of fiery red hair. A bad memory came to my mind, thinking that my own white moonlight was forcibly taken away by a man with red hair in Gryffindor College. So Professor Snape walked towards Harry, knocked off the salty pig's hand on Harry's shoulder with his own hand, then pointed at Ron, and said coldly without any emotion, "In order to enhance confrontation, different academies mixed teams, and you went to exchange opponents with Draco." Ron wanted to argue, but seeing Professor Snape's murderous eyes, he had no choice but to exchange team members with Draco silently. Draco was stunned when he heard that it was Professor Snape. Originally, he was very happy today and felt that he had met a beautiful lady as his new friend. As a result, in the scene in the classroom, Draco simply understood what it means to be heartbroken. When Professor Snape called the lady he thought Mr. Potter, Draco felt that his three views were about to collapse. Broken. Then seeing the sincere smile on the head of his own academy, Draco felt that he still lacked basic judgments about the evil in the world. But being forced to listen to the head of his own academy, Draco had no choice but to walk towards Harry. After the two sides exchanged positions, Snape nodded and announced the start of practice. "What I want to practice today is the Iron Armor Curse. Of course, this is a relatively advanced spell. It is difficult for ordinary first year students to use it, but it is still possible to release some youth version of the Iron Armor Curse that can resist some small evil curses." Looking at the young boy, who was still in a daze, Draco felt complicated. He really wanted to give Harry a hard time and let him see the darkness of the world. But looking at the person in front of him, he was motionless because he was in a daze, with those long eyelashes, delicate facial features, emerald eyes and that delicate red lips. Just looking at Draco felt a different feeling, unusual heartbeat. "Oh, sorry, I was just distracted. What does Professor Snape want us to do?" Harry, who finally came back to his senses, looked at Draco in front of him and felt a little surprised, but he still asked a little embarrassedly, "Oh, Professor Snape asked us to practice the Iron Armor charm." Looking at the beautiful boy in front of him, Draco explained patiently. Then who are we going to attack? Harry tilted his head and asked curiously. Seeing Harry's actions, Draco felt his heart was hit by something and made a very gentlemanly gesture as you please. Harry was no longer polite, took out his wand directly and cast a spell at Draco. Stupefy passed out. Draco, who was still immersed in the beautiful fantasy just now, was directly hit by Harry's spell, and he flew upside down, fell hard to the ground and passed out. Seeing Draco flying upside down, the classroom was in chaos again, so Professor Snape had to suspend the lecture to check on Draco's injuries. I was still muttering in my heart why there were always various accidents in my class. Unlike the chaotic situation in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, the Hogwarts infirmary was particularly quiet. There was only one bed in the entire infirmary, and this was Professor Quirrell, who had been devastated and strongly demanded psychological treatment after the last social death incident. Kiro, we need to change our plan now. That little wizard surnamed Dumbledore is too strong. We can't confront him head on. We need to change our thinking and find a way to draw him to our side. Voldemort's voice sounded in Professor Quirrell's heart. Didn't you promise me you could beat him? Professor Quirrell, who has already died socially, said fearlessly. Voldemort was silent in a rare way, and he didn't expect such a result. How did he know where Dumbledore found such a little monster? It was simply outrageous. Don't think about it anymore. Our main purpose now is to steal the Philosopher's Stone, and the other is to find a way to win that little wizard to our side. If it doesn't work, kill him. After I'm resurrected, you will be the greatest hero. I will bestow you with endless wealth and lofty glory. Voldemort continued to draw big pies and said to Professor Quirrell, "Then shall we proceed as planned?" asked Professor Quirrell. No, the last duel has already made Dumbledore and the professors suspicious. It is unrealistic to steal the Philosopher's Stone now. We need a brand new plan. Voldemort stated his new plan to Professor Quirrell in detail and promised that after the plan was completed, Professor Quirrell would be restored to freedom and he would be bestowed with endless wealth and lofty honor. As you wish, my master. Professor Quirrell replied in his mind. Then start acting quickly. Don't pretend to be dead here anymore. Voldemort shouted loudly in his head. Professor Quirrell responded, then lifted the quilt and left the Hogwarts infirmary quietly. Chapter 47. I never expected that the situation of students being injured would appear again. This is simply unimaginable, and it is a discredit to the 1,000-year history of Hogwarts. Outside Mrs. Panglay's infirmary, Professor McGonagall was furious at the 6 people in front of him. All the 6 people present had their heads down, not daring to face Professor McGonagall. These 6 people are the main persons in charge of this matter: Augustus and Harry 5, and of course the classroom professor, Professor Snape. Professor McGonagall looked at the few people in front of him, and he became angry for no reason, so he reprimanded loudly. Severus, as a classroom professor, you failed to fulfill your obligation to protect the students. This is your negligence. It seems that I have to suggest to the principal that we should change to a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Hearing Professor McGonagall's merciless words, Professor Snape's carefully groomed face that was no longer greasy still couldn't help twitching crazily. The Defense Against the Dark Arts professor who has been waiting for more than 10 years has only worked for less than a week, and this is about to be lost. Professor Snape hated Malfoy to death. When I go back tonight, I must write to Lucius and have a good talk with him about the education of my godson. It is unimaginable that I would fall in love with a boy and cause myself to be knocked down by the curse. I think Professor McGonagall, Professor Snape or... Seeing Snape's twitching face and murderous eyes, Augustus decided to defend himself. After all, Draco is still his right-hand man now. If he really loses Professor Snape's Defense Against the Dark Arts professorship, then I don't think Draco will want to get out of this infirmary this year. Shut up. This matter will be discussed by the principal and the professors. Mr. Dumbledore, you are just a student who has no right to decide the professor's affairs. Now stand up for me obediently. Before Augustus could speak, he was forcefully interrupted by Professor McGonagall. Looking at Professor McGonagall like an angry lioness, Augustus wisely chose to shut up. Draco, don't blame the brother for being unjust. The eldest brother really worked hard. Augustus thought silently, looking at Augustus, who bowed his head and said nothing. Professor McGonagall felt an unprecedented grievance. I have worked hard to teach at Hogwarts for decades. When Dumbledore went outside to fight against his old friend, I managed the affairs of the college on my behalf. When Dumbledore and the Order of the Phoenix fought against Voldemort, I had to be in Hogwarts for ear support. Finally, the two wizarding wars finally came to an end, and I have lived a stable life for more than 10 years. Dumbledore sent his evil obstacle to Hogwarts. This little bastard is not only talented, but also very powerful. But he just doesn't have the talent for transfiguration. Professor McGonagall felt very aggrieved when he watched him regain honors in their respective fields as Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape because of his talents in spells and potions. Okay, I won't say anything superfluous. This kind of thing is not allowed to happen again. Professor Snape, please take some students back to where they should go. Coming out of his thoughts, Professor McGonagall said softly. Hearing Professor McGonagall's words, everyone present breathed a sigh of relief, so they followed Professor Snape to the auditorium to prepare for dinner. Augustus watched the crowd leave and wanted to get away with it. He quietly followed behind the team, but Professor McGonagall's voice came from behind before he had taken 2 steps. Mr. Dumbledore, wait a moment, I still have a lot to say to you. Go to my office. Augustus had no choice but to follow Professor McGonagall towards her office. Professor McGonagall's office is located at the top of a tower. From the office window, you can directly see the Hogwarts Quidditch pitch. The main body of the office is a double-height structure with huge bookshelves on both sides and a curved desk in the middle. There are many documents on the desk. It can be seen that as the actual manager of Hogwarts, old B just a mascot, Professor McGonagall is still very busy. Please sit down, Mr. Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall led Augustus into his office and then pointed at random with his wand, turning the pile of books next to the door into a chair, and then pointed to the chair and said to Augustus, "Thank you." Augustus replied politely. After all, he respected Professor Mike very much. Seeing that Augustus had already sat down, Professor McGonagall asked straight to the point. "Mr. Dumbledore, you should know why I called you here." Well, I admit that everything that happened this afternoon was my mastermind. Seeing that Professor McGonagall already knew everything, Augustus could only say helplessly. Seeing the indifferent expression on Augustus's face, Professor McGonagall's eyelids twitched wildly, but he still spoke with suppressed anger. "What I want to ask is not these, but other things. You know what I want to know." Hearing Professor McGonagall's words, Augustus couldn't help but thump in his heart. It seems that his use of magic boxes to conduct dangerous potion experiments has been exposed. Well, I admit that I should not conduct dangerous potion experiments in school, but I assure you that my experiments are absolutely safe. Hearing this, Professor McGonagall couldn't help but twitched on his face. It seemed that he still underestimated this little bastard, and then continued. "Not these. I want to ask other questions." "Other questions? Is there a traitor around me who confessed that he was practicing fiend fire next to the Forbidden Forest and throwing experimental medicine into the Black Lake to observe the phenomenon?" Augustus immediately stood up, bowed to Professor McGonagall, and apologized sincerely. "I'm sorry, Professor. I shouldn't have practiced the fierce fire curse next to the Forbidden Forest, and I shouldn't have poured potions into the Black Lake, but I did this just for magic experiments. Don't worry, I didn't hurt anything." After hearing Augustus's sincere apology, Professor McGonagall's eyes darkened, and he almost fainted. He never thought that Dumbledore would bring him such a big trouble. It seems that our Mr. Dumbledore's school life is very rich. I don't even know about it. Professor McGonagall said viciously. Hearing that Augustus was struck by lightning, it seemed that he was thinking too much and accidentally blew up all the things he had done. "Then what exactly do you want to ask, Professor?" Looking at Professor McGonagall's dark face, Augustus asked cautiously. "Of course it's your transfiguration results, Mr. Dumbledore. Shouldn't a professor care about the academic performance of his students?" Hearing that Augustus had mixed feelings in his heart, he cursed inwardly. What kind of riddles should he speak? I hate riddlers the most in my life. but he still said cautiously, "Success. I'm not bad at transfiguration. You see, I succeed in transfiguration every time." Hearing what Augustus said, Professor McGonagall felt his temples throbbing. "You are also called success in transformation. If you teach you to use matches to turn silver needles, you can turn matches into a big sword. You can use books to turn them into silver needles. If you want to turn it into a snuff bottle, you can use the book to turn it into a grenade for muggles, which is also called success in transformation." Chapter 48 Useless Papa and Awakened Harry. After all, have those things been transformed successfully? It's just that they don't meet the requirements a little bit. Augustus watched Professor McGonagall remain silent, so he had no choice but to continue talking. "There is no way that my magic power is too violent, and I can cast harmful magic with ease, but it is a bit too difficult to carry out subtle and delicate transformations. But this does not mean that Augustus cannot perform the transfiguration technique. I'm afraid that I may not be able to do it with a match, but it is still very easy to conjure an AK-47 or Gatling with blue fire. Okay, stop making unnecessary sophistry, Mr. Dumbledore. I don't ask you to complete some subtle transformations, but with your talent for magic spells, I will systematically summarize several methods of transformation. It's easier to say." Professor McGonagall ignored Augustus' speech and said forcefully. Hearing this, Augustus thumped in his heart. To sum up the method, the summary of his previous set of spells was nothing more than plagiarizing the results of the system. Isn't it embarrassing for me to sum up the method of transfiguration? In the holidays before Christmas, the Ministry of Magic will finally decide on the level of the mail-in medal awarded to you, and there will be interviews with several authoritative newspapers. I hope that before that, we can have another genius of transfiguration at Hogwarts. In order to improve the reputation of our Hogwarts in the magic education circle, this task will be completed by educating you, Mr. Dumbledore. Seeing that Augustus was silent, Professor McGonagall continued. After listening to Professor McGonagall's words, Augustus felt that his scalp was a little numb. It's not that I don't want to, but it's really impossible for a concubine to do it. How about this? I'm going to the Hogwarts infirmary now. I will directly kill Voldemort with fiend fire. I just ask you to let me go. Augustus thought silently in his heart, made up his mind, and said to Professor McGonagall, "How about this, Professor? Can I obtain other achievements from other aspects to offset your request this time?" Professor McGonagall felt even more aggrieved when he heard what Augustus said. Isn't he his professor? Why did the little bastard in front of me push back against such a simple request? This little bastard is as annoying as his grandfather. Thinking of this, Professor McGonagall said forcefully, "The achievements in other areas are certainly worthy of recognition, but Hogwarts pursues all-round development, and even you are no exception. With your current transfiguration results, I guess you will definitely fail the final exam. If you fail the transfiguration exam, I will, as the vice principal of Hogwarts, keep you back, and you will not be able to advance to the second year smoothly." After listening to Professor McGonagall's strong speech, Augustus felt that his whole body was not good, and he was repeated, "I'm a dignified time traveler, and I came to the Academy of Magic to study, but I had to repeat my grade." Thinking of this, Augustus still said a little unwillingly, "I'm excellent in other aspects. I think I can apply to the principal to exempt me from the transfiguration exam." Humph. Hearing this, Professor McGonagall snorted dismissively and then said forcefully, "I'm sorry, Mr. Dumbledore. Managing the academy and administering the exams are all within the scope of my duties, and Headmaster Dumbledore has no right to interfere. So you only have two choices. Either publish the summary method on transfiguration, and then successfully enter the second grade with a perfect score in transfiguration, or be forced to repeat the grade with a 0 score in transfiguration. The principal has no right to interfere with the students' exam questions. Then what's the use of that old dang in this school?" Hearing that Augustus was struck by lightning, he blurted out the question without thinking. Hearing Augustus' question, Professor McGonagall was also stunned for a long time, and was speechless for a while. "Yes, what use is Dumbledore to the school? I have worked at Hogwarts for decades, starting as an assistant to the professor of Dumbledore's transfiguration. It seems that I handle all the trivial matters about the students and the school by myself. Then what use is he in the end? After more than 10 minutes, Professor McGonagall came back from his thoughts and said seriously to Augustus, "Nothing, no use." Hearing Professor McGonagall's answer, Augustus was completely ashamed. He didn't expect that his identity as the strongest Hogwarts connection was so trivial. Just a few days ago, the old man was still bragging to himself every day how powerful he was when he was young, what honors he had won, and how respectable he was. Thinking about it now is farting. A headmaster who can't even exercise his authority in his own school. What's the use of it? Augustus has already included Dumbledore in the list of inferior properties. Okay, Professor, I see. I will try my best. Augustus, who had been cornered, stood up and said seriously to Professor McGonagall. Then he turned and left, his back full of a feeling of bleakness. Augustus came to the Hogwarts Great Hall. Logically speaking, many people should have finished their dinner and left at this time, but the Great Hall was still full of people. Are you really Harry? You're so beautiful. How is this macup done? Can you let me touch it? I really didn't expect Harry to be so pretty as a girl. Yeah, I think so too. She's prettier than most girls in the first grade. Several people from the college surrounded Harry at the Gryffindor table, commenting on Harry who hadn't taken off his macup. Most of the girls were concerned about how Harry's macup was drawn, and some bold girls started stroking Harry with their hands. The boys were mostly discussing Harry's appearance after macup, and comparing Harry with the girls in his own academy. The eyes of several boys looking at Harry became indescribable. Harry's face was flushed, and he couldn't even lift his shy head. It can be seen how outrageous the behavior those seniors had done to Harry just now. Hermione looked angry, and her messy brown hair looked even more ferocious. It can be seen that many boys compared her with Harry, but the result was not very satisfactory to Miss Beaver. Daphne, with a smile on her face, was gentle and explained the macup techniques in detail to the girls who wanted to know about Harry's macup, and of course a few boys. Ron was pushed aside, and he tried desperately to squeeze in again, but he couldn't. Augustus waved his wand helplessly, and the invisible repulsion separated everyone. Augustus continued. Okay, you guys are already very distressed. If you didn't see Harry, you will go back. Hearing what Augustus said, everyone hurriedly dispersed. After all, no one wanted to provoke him. Sorry Harry, I didn't expect to bother you so much, and I apologize. Looking at Harry, who was already somewhat disheveled, Augustus said sincerely, "It's okay, I'm actually not bothered. I'm actually quite happy to have so many people following me." Harry straightened his clothes and said sincerely to Augustus, "Nanny, this savior won't be completely sidetracked by his behavior this time. Is it true that, as the internet said before, there are only 0 times and countless times for women's clothing? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49. You are just laughing at me. Seeing Augustus standing there with a strange expression, Harry quickly explained. I'm not saying I like womenswear, I'm just a little bit happier, because I've never received so much attention. Harry was telling the truth, not to mention his own tragic 11 years. Even if he entered the magic world, most people only wanted to make friends with him, because of his name as the savior. However, today, so many people took the initiative to talk to him, even out of prank ideas. Harry felt very touched. After all, Harry was so eager for friends. After listening to Harry's speech, Augustus didn't speak, and sat down on the dining table, and began to sigh. What's the matter, Augustus? If you have any troubles, you can tell us. I left a copy of your favorite strawberry pudding for you. Eating some sweets can make people happy. Seeing that Augustus was not happy, Daphne took a piece of strawberry pudding, walked to Augustus and said softly, "Thank you, Daphne, for being so kind to me." After Augustus took the strawberry pudding, he thanked Daphne with a smile. While eating the pudding, Augustus cried to everyone about what happened to him in Professor McGonagall's office and Professor McGonagall's threats to him. Push. Untimely laughter interrupted Augustus crying, and Augustus looked over quickly, only to see Hermione quickly covered her mouth, but her face was still flushed. I think Professor McGonagall is still too strict. How can I say that the transfiguration technique failed to achieve its goal? I haven't succeeded in transfiguring anything, it's just a little bit that doesn't meet the specifications. Augustus continued to speak, but as soon as he finished speaking, there was another untimely laughter. Looking around, he saw Harry and Ron cover their mouths with their hands, their faces flushed red, just like Hermione. You actually asked me to repeat the grade. How could I repeat the grade? If I repeat the grade, won't you all be my brothers and sisters next year? Augustus suppressed his anger and continued. Push. This time even Daphne next to her couldn't help laughing. Seeing Augustus looking over, she quickly turned her face away. Is this funny? What are you laughing at? Augustus said loudly. No, we just felt a little happy to see Harry happy. Hermione said to Augustus, suppressing a smile. This transfiguration. Push. Augustus had just calmed down when he was interrupted by laughter just as he spoke. Augustus said angrily, what the hell are you laughing at? We are just happy for Harry. Daphne covered her face and said tremblingly, this metamorphosis. Push. Seeing them laughing again, Augustus shouted angrily, enough, you are obviously laughing at me, you are him, and you have not stopped since just now. After finishing speaking, Augustus ate the pudding in his hand, turned around angrily and left. Seeing the back of Augustus leaving, the four people present couldn't bear it any longer and burst out laughing. I never expected that the strongest genius at Hogwarts in the past century, Dumbledore of the new century, would be forced to repeat a grade because of his failure in transfiguration. I laughed so hard ha ha ha. Ron covered his stomach and laughed as he talked, almost unable to stand up. There was no way Augustus put too much pressure on them. From the beginning to the present, almost everyone, whether it is a professor or a classmate, can almost only look up to him. Now this genius will be forced to repeat a grade because of a magic that almost all first year students have mastered. Thinking about it is a happy thing. Listening to the laughter coming from behind, Augustus was trembling with anger. He was sweating all over his body at night and his hands and feet were cold. Hell is really empty and demons are in the world. Can Hogwarts be cured? After all, I want you to be satisfied, and tears flowed down without disappointment. This world is full of discrimination against the strong. Why is it not a successful transfiguration technique to turn books into grenades? When will I really stand up? Back in the Slytherin dormitory, Augustus was lying on the bed, thinking about what he should do in despair. At this moment, Draco returned to his dormitory from the infirmary, looked at Augustus who was lying on the bed, and pretended to be dead, and asked resentfully, why don't you come to see me in the infirmary, so that I can only stay under the same roof with Professor Quirrell's pervert? To be honest, I'm really afraid that he will be pulled on the bed again. When Augustus heard the words, he was furious. If I hadn't helped you out and offended Professor McGonagall, how could he have fallen into such a situation? Just as he was about to get up and give Malfoy a love education, he suddenly thought of an idea. Quirrell, right, why did I forget him? He said quickly in his mind. Little devil, how many magic points did I gain in the last action I took to trap Voldemort? Please wait a moment, I'm inquiring for the host. The inquiry is successful. The last action was judged by the system. It conforms to the rule of the traveler, and the target person is more important. Reward 800 magic points. Now there are 1090 points left. The system replied. 1090 plus the 10 points I signed in today. I have exactly 1100 points, and the system will draw a lottery. Augustus thought for a while and replied. Do you really want it? There is no guarantee for the 11th draw. According to observations, the host needs at least purple rewards to survive the crisis. Are you sure about the lottery draw? After listening to the system, Oslo couldn't help feeling a little bit in his heart. Thinking about the situation, where he barely got the guarantee in the first 30 consecutive draws. This time the 11 draws will be purple, which seems a bit difficult. The system has detected that the host is going through a major crisis, which may affect the reputation of the host's traverses, and hereby launches a targeted lottery, 1000 magic points once, and there is a 50% probability that there will be an item that can solve the current crisis. While Augustus was hesitating, the voice of the system came again. Hearing that Augustus's eyes are bright, it seems that the system is still taking care of itself. 50% means that there is a 55% chance, regardless of all stats, he resolutely said to the system. Lottery. As soon as the voice fell, a half red and half black disc appeared in my mind. Red means that I was drawn, and black means that I was not one. The disc immediately began to spin. After a few seconds, the pointer finally stopped at the edge of the black down. Augustus wiped the cold sweat off his brow and said a few words in his heart. I'm European. I'm European. Only after extracting the item. Look at the item introduction. Knowledge converter. You can put your hard learning results into it, and you will get all the theoretical knowledge materials you want. Looking at this thing, Augustus was confused, so he asked the system. How do you use this printer-like thing? What an idiot. Put your learning results on the top, and then input other theoretical knowledge you want. As long as the machine determines that the number of learning results you give is enough, it will spit out the learning knowledge you want from the bottom. The system replied. So what are learning outcomes? Augustus asked. To put it simply, it is your own academic performance, such as notes, self-annotations, even the theoretical knowledge you copied from books. The system replied. Copying books, then I definitely can't copy them by myself. After listening to the systematic explanation, Augustus looked at his roommate with more ferocious eyes. Chapter 50 Banknote Ability. Draco, bring me your transfiguration class notes. Augustus said kindly to Draco. Hearing Augustus' strange tone, Draco felt his heart tighten, but he still said helplessly, spreading his hands to Augustus. I'm sorry, Chief. Now Professor McGonagall, the transfiguration techniques taught are too simple, and I didn't take class notes. Augustus's face twitched inadvertently. He wanted to hit someone when he said this, but he still suppressed his anger, took out a first grade transfiguration textbook from the bookshelf, followed Draco, and continued said kindly. It doesn't matter if you didn't take class notes. Come and copy the first 10 pages of the transfiguration textbook for me. Draco felt a little baffled, but seeing the twitching face of his chief, he didn't dare to say anything more, picked up the textbook, and began to copy on the parchment. After about 40 minutes, Draco shook his sore arm, and handed the 10 pages of parchment he had copied to Augustus. Augustus took out the knowledge converter from the system space, and put the 10 pieces of parchment on top of the knowledge conversion machine. From the monitor screen in front of him, he saw that the 10 pieces of parchment were worth 10 knowledge points. Augustus nodded, took off the parchment, looked at the setting button on the knowledge converter, and set up the first year metamorphosis summary tutorial. The converter immediately indicated that 1000 knowledge points were needed. Looking at the number in front of him, Augustus rubbed his chin. 1000 knowledge points means 1000 pages of books, and the average number of first grade books is 200 pages, or about 5 books. For Draco, cows and horses have no human rights. It is still too easy. After all, Hogwarts students still have a lot of spare time. So Augustus cancelled the settings, and then changed the settings to all transfiguration summary textbooks for grades 1 to 3, and finally pressed the OK button. After a few seconds of machine calculation, the converter shows that 111,000 knowledge points are needed. Seeing this number, Augustus was dumbfounded, and quickly wanted to cancel, but found that he couldn't find the cancel button, so he had to talk to the system. What's going on here? 1000 for the first grade, but 10 for the third grade, and why can't it be cancelled? Once the target is determined by the converter, the target cannot be changed until the target is completed. Your first setting has not been confirmed, so you can cancel it. After the target has been determined for the second time, it is naturally impossible to cancel, and this thing is priced according to the difficulty of the obtained item. The more difficult the item, the higher the price. Finally, I added to the host that the summary of knowledge obtained by the host must be voluntarily donated by the host, or purchased with his own money, 1 knowledge point, and 1 gold galleon. The price cannot be changed. The system replied. Hearing that Augustus was like a thunderbolt, he was speechless for a long time, but he still didn't believe in evil and wanted to throw the 10 pages of parchment copied by Draco into the converter, but the converter gave the 4 pages of parchment to him. Spit it out. Obviously, the converter will not recognize the knowledge that is not gifted with the owner's consent or purchased with his own money. This is the item you said can help me tide over the difficulties. You are really cheating. Augustus complained about the system in his mind. Thank you for the compliment. This item can help the host to tide over the difficulties, but I didn't say that I don't want to pay a certain price. Besides, this is not your own death. Obviously, the knowledge of the first grade is enough, and you must be in the 1st to 3rd grade. The system refuted without emotion. Augustus settled down, so he continued to smile at Draco. Oh, my dear roommate, I like your writing so much. Can you give it to me? Listening to Augustus' greasy words, Draco felt goosebumps on his skin, but he nodded in agreement. Augustus immediately threw the 10 parchments into the converter. The converter swallowed the 10 parchments, and the progress bar immediately displayed 10 over 111,000. It seemed to work, and then Augustus continued to ask Draco to transcribe the next 20 pages. Draco heard that he was powerless, so Augustus decided that Draco could not help him accomplish Professor McGonagall's goal, and planned to remove him from the positions of Vice President of the Study Club and Chief Assistant of Slytherin. Threatened by this, Draco had no choice but to continue his work. After about 2 hours, Draco felt that he had never written so many words in his life, so he reluctantly handed over 20 pieces of parchment to Augustus, claiming that he was completely voluntary of. Looking at the 20 sheets of parchment in his hand, Augustus frowned more and more. The first 5 or 6 sheets were fine, but the fonts on the back had begun to deform, making it almost impossible to distinguish. Augustus put the 20 parchments on the converter for valuation, and the results showed that the 20 parchments were only worth 8 knowledge points. Repeating simple copying, the price will only get lower and lower, and you need to have your own insights in it to be high value knowledge. Just when Augustus was wondering, the voice of the system came slowly. Now Augustus really has nothing to do. It seems that the road of copying books is not feasible. Otherwise, following this trend, I'm afraid that he will have to copy tens of thousands of books to fill this schedule. It seems that he can only use his own tricks. Thinking of the 11 points, Augustus feels pain in his stomach. If the 11 points are more than 11 galleons, Augustus took out his magic suitcase, led Draco in, walked through the workshop and weapon room, and came to the innermost secret room. The two stopped at the door of a huge safe. Augustus went up and turned the code lock. The door of the safe opened slowly, and the two of them couldn't keep their eyes open due to a dazzling golden light. Wow. Looking at the 5 or 6 meter tall Gingallan in front of him, even Draco, who was born as an aristocrat, inadvertently exclaimed. He never expected that his boss would be so rich. Looking at Gingallan, who was only 5 or 6 meters tall, Augustus couldn't help but sigh how poor he was. It took more than a year of hard work in the magic world to accumulate such a meager fortune. Pulled out of the sad mood, Augustus took out a box with a traceless stretching spell and used the flying spell to put 12 gold galleons into the box. Looking at the Gingallan who had been reduced by more than 1 meter, Augustus felt very heartbroken. This was earned by his dear Dean, bottle after bottle of potion, and he was in the America. All the singles robbed were her own hard-earned money. After packing the money, Augustus took Draco out of his secret base and came to the Slytherin common room. Augustus threw the cash box to Draco, then pointed to the converter and continued said, "Did you see that thing? You sent a message to all the teachers and students in the school to bring your study materials and notes from the 1st to 3rd grades to the Slytherin common room. After inspection, they can be exchanged for galleons. Put their information on this kind of thing. It will show how many points it is worth, and then you will exchange it with them at a ratio of 1:1 point." Speaking of Augustus, he pointed to the number displayed by the converter. Draco looked at it and instantly realized that he seemed to have lost 18 gold galleons. "Chief, should I be able to get 18 gold galleons?" Draco said unwillingly. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.